imagine I had opulent parents with houses all over the place.
Exactly.
Yeah, no,
Anyway.
I just get confused because I get confused about what the point of taxation is. What is the where are the sluice gates of taxation as things go in and out of superannuation? So if a parent wants to give super to a child, don't they have to pass through a taxable event when they withdraw it from their super and put it into the child's super? You can't go from a parent's super to a child's super without it being taxed.
No, but you can go from cash.
But that cash got taxed.
That cash got taxed. But once you can send the super, you can buy the Woolworths shares with it. And when the Woolworths shares go up and all the dividends come in, then you're in a
This is why Bill Shorten lost the election, because it makes your brain hurt when you start thinking about these complicated things.
Well, I'm just saying I think it's starting to be clear that when they're talking about changes, that they are keen on changes.
You're reading between the lines. You're reading the tea leaves.
It's at the top end. It's not at the average. Going to talk to Anne Hollins about talking about your dad. And everyone's dad and mum. Can you be a great parent if you've had bad parenting yourself? And how do you achieve that? It's often said that the main model for people's parenting is the way they were parented themselves. What happens if you grew up in a pretty dysfunctional household? How do you make that transition and make sure you are a much better parent? You're a better parent than the parenting you received.
You definitely can do that. I reckon my parents were great parents because they had terrible parents.
Yeah, well, that's right, and
didn't want to repeat the mistakes.
Exactly right. So that's a midweek conference at 5:30.
Fantastic. Thanks, Richard Glover. Up after the news headlines. I'll see you tomorrow.
Get ready to sparkle at Mardi Gras 2023 with me, Christine Arnoux. Join me live on Saturday on ABC Radio's National Weekend Evenings.
All right, let's get our feathers on.
Celebrate the spirit of love and glitter with us as we bring you the festivities of this year's Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras.
Go wild, baby.
Mardi Gras 2023, live on Saturday from 7 p.m. here on ABC Radio Sydney.
Good afternoon, Adam Story with an ABC News update. Her child is among those taken to hospital after a multi-vehicle crash on the Great Western Highway in the Blue Mountains. Police say the accident involved a truck and 6 cars. 6 other people have been taken to hospitals across Western Sydney, including one man with serious injuries. The Prime Minister says Australians with average super balances would not be affected by any suggested change to super tax concessions. The Treasurer Jim Chalmers has this week questioned whether the system is sustainable, pointing to figures that suggest concessions will cost more than the age pension by around 2050. The first home buyback offers have been made to flood-affected residents in the Northern Rivers region. The Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation says it aims to make offers to the first 250 residents by the end of April. More than 50,000 regional apprentices, trainees and students are now eligible to get a $250 rebate on their travel costs. Apprentices and students based in regional areas and aged between 16 and 66 can now apply for the $250 travel card through Service New South Wales. The state government has announced it will expand its affordable IVF initiative to include egg freezing if re-elected. The procedure generally isn't covered by Medicare and can cost around $10,000 per cycle. Aid organisations say the recovery from the earthquakes that have hit Turkey and Syria over the past fortnight could take up to 5 years. The death toll from the quakes that struck 2 weeks ago is now more than 47,000. At least 8 people were killed in the most recent tremor. Meanwhile, food drops to isolated communities in New Zealand are still being delivered by air as authorities work to urgently repair hundreds of kilometres of damaged roads, and communities in New Zealand are bracing for more wet weather, particularly in the Hawke's Bay region. And the National Rugby League has cancelled its annual season launch as negotiations between the league and players continue over a new collective bargaining agreement. Tensions between players and administrators have been building as the men's league counts down to round 1, which starts on Thursday next week. Showers easing in Sydney this afternoon, partly cloudy tomorrow, the slight chance of a shower, a top of 25. More news at 4.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Today, the PM promises no big changes with superannuation, but what of the 80,000 accounts with balances of over 2 million? Do they still remain in his sights? Also today... the push to heat-proof our cities, and a visit to the place that's leading the charge. That's Self-Improvement Wednesday. And a little later, everywhere. Let's check the traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
And Jeff Wallace is here from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. Now, we've heard about a serious crash in the mountains, Wentworth Falls. It has shut down the Great Western Highway both ways between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. Audley Weir, that's shut down with flooding, so to the Wakehurst Parkway between North Narrabeen and Oxford Falls. Also, Tempe, a crash just clearing now off the Princess Highway, Tempe Bridge. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
Yeah, coming up, are you one of those frustrated people who've got some money in a deposit account and just are amazed at how little you are being paid compared to the amount that's coming out from, say, a credit card account or a mortgage account? There seems to be obviously there's going to be a gap between those two things. I understand that. That's how banks make their profit. But there's research out today that suggests that the gap is much bigger than it used to be. Say 5 years ago, the gap used to be much smaller. We're going to talk to Peter Martin about how the banks are managing to get away with charging people such increasing amounts for things like mortgages and credit cards and personal loans, and yet on deposit accounts giving so little. In terms of the transaction accounts, which represent, in terms of the Commonwealth Bank, for instance, 1 in 7 accounts of these transaction accounts, or at least 1 in 7 of the dollars held by the banks are in these transaction accounts. The interest rate is, let me count. Oh, yes, 0. How can that be? Peter Martin in just a tick. But the social media sensation energy drink being marketed at Australian children contains 6 times the amount of caffeine as a can of Coca-Cola. There are reports today. It's only legal to sell here due to a loophole that allows it to be considered a dietary supplement. This is a product which, according to nutritionists, is actually quite dangerous for children. Catherine Saxelby is a nutritionist and founder of foodwatch.com.au and joins us here on Drive. Catherine, good afternoon.
Oh, good afternoon, Richard. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, that's fine. What can this level of caffeine do to a child's system?
Sorry, you have to repeat it again. I misheard. You were breaking up.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I'm just wondering, at this level, what does this level of caffeine do to particularly a young person's body?
Oh, well, the amount that most of us can handle is about 300 to 400 milligrams, and a can of Prime Energy drink contains 200 milligrams. So I think you're already halfway there. You're already at your maximum amount. You're at your amount, even if you've had after 1 can. So I don't think it's anywhere near. It's not safe enough to recommend to footballers and trainee and kids under the age of 18.
How can there be a loophole that has a limit on the amount of caffeine, and yet if you call it something different, if you call it a dietary supplement, you can do whatever you like?
I don't know. It's just quite amazing that it would be allowed in because even though if it's called a dietary supplement, I mean, we've had Logan Paul and KSI promoting it on TV all the time. So I don't know how it can come into the country if it's being called just a dietary supplement. I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, it's obviously a commercial drink being advertised in a very unsubtle way. What would it do to a child? Let's say you have a couple of these drinks. What's happening to, I don't know, your blood pressure, your heart rate, all those sorts of things?
Yes, it's very unsafe. They can cause insomnia, upset stomach, heartburn, tachycardia, which is too rapid heart rate, which is what I have if I have 2 cups of coffee. And your mind is always in overdrive, irritability, over-anxiety and frequent urination. So you don't want to have too much caffeine. I have my caffeine in the morning. I have 1, maybe 2 drinks, and that's about it for the day. And I don't have any after about 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
I mean, one of the ridiculous things about it is if you look on their website, the Prime Energy website, there's a line that says the drink is not suitable for children under 18. And yet if you look at the marketing, if you look at those crowds who turned up to see the 2 stars you mentioned outside the Channel 9 studios, they're all 14-year-olds.
Yes. They're all absolutely mad. They're internet personalities. And KSI is an influencer and Logan Paul is a wrestler, I suppose. Mm-hmm. It's really unbelievable, and a 250 ml can of energy drink such as Red Bull has 80 milligrams in it, and this has 200 grams, And these are big serve size. These are 500 mils. So you would expect to get probably less in 500 mils. You'd expect just to quench your thirst. But, you actually get a lot of caffeine in here as well.
Yeah, and no one would think to give a 14-year-old or a 12-year-old, no one would think, say, sit down at the cafe and have 3 espressos in a row, and yet that's essentially what you're doing.
Yes, exactly. And that's what you do exactly. You don't think about giving them anything with caffeine if they're 14 or 15 or 13 or below that, but you'd happily give them an energy drink. And a lot of people don't drink tea or coffee. And I think the caffeine in coffee and tea is probably natural there, whereas it's added in these energy drinks. So there's something going on with the caffeine that's been added as opposed to caffeine that's there naturally.
In coffee, Catherine Saxelby is here from foodwatch.com.au. I mean, we talk mainly about young people, but if you're in terms of adult consumers, is it a great product for them either?
Sorry, you're breaking up. I missed that question. What did you say at the end?
What about for adults? Do you think if you're
adults?
Yeah, for adults.
Well, I think for adults you might would take it in and see how you go. Most people can handle 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine a day. That's 4 or 5 cups of instant coffee or 3 shots of espresso, like could be a latte, a cappuccino. They all start with a shot. So that's what most people can handle. So I just think as an adult, you just have to, suck it and see. Have to take the caffeine that's in the energy drink and then see how you feel. Some people are not affected at all by caffeine, and I think those people should be recognised, and we should acknowledge them. So. Anyway, so
okay, but understand
that was all I was going to say.
If you understand, if you're drinking this product, you're drinking 6 times the amount of caffeine, even in a can of Coke.
Coca-Cola,
wow.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right.
And caffeine comes in lots of places, not just in tea and coffee. It can come in chocolate. It can come in cocoa. In dark chocolate, there's twice as much as in milk chocolate, and even the no-dose stimulant, that truckies take, the stimulants to keep them awake, that has a level of 100 milligrams. So this drink is twice that amount of the no-dose stimulant. So I don't think it's at all suitable for young children, especially those who are training in sport, and I don't think it's suitable for adults. Adults have to wait and see if they have any effect from the caffeine.
And maybe the loophole in the law has to be changed.
Yes, exactly. So I was saying to your producer before that maybe it's come from New Zealand, because the supplements used to come that way from New Zealand to Australia because there was a loophole. They were produced in New Zealand, but then they could somehow come into Australia. But we couldn't find where these drinks were being produced.
All right, but that might be one of the loopholes that needs to be closed. Hey, Catherine, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Bye
now, Richard.
Catherine Saxelby from foodwatch.com.au. What's the appeal of these drinks, particularly to young people? I don't know if you saw the photograph in today's Sydney Morning Herald. It features the scene outside the Channel 9 studios when Carl Stefanovic had these 2 influencers on the Today Show and kind of invited their fans to come down to the studio. It's just this. It's as if the Beatles are there. I mean, it's an absolutely crowded area. I don't know how many people, but hundreds and hundreds of these young people absolutely coming to see their heroes, and no doubt absolutely turned on to the idea of drinking these energy drinks. Quite an amazing scene, especially as the 2 stars of people. Well, I've never heard of them anyway. What's the attraction? Professor Eva Kemps is a psychologist and eating behaviour expert from Flinders University. She did a study on energy drinks and addiction, and she joins us here on The Drive Show. Eva, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
What do the younger people, the 14-year-old boys who seem to be the main market, what do they see in these drinks?
Yeah, like you say, they are the target market, and it is a lot of to do with marketing, and lots of reasons why people drink energy drinks. People talk about it increases their alertness, it helps to combat fatigue. Some people claim that, it helps them to study, it makes them perform better on the sport field, and it's great to mix with alcohol at parties. But I think this trend with the influencers marketing as well, it probably appeals to a sense of coolness and being part of the crowd and, a sense of fun and being out with friends as well. So it's not so much marketing the drink itself, but the whole experience around the consumption of the drink.
Now, of course, those claims about alertness, up to a point, they're true. Every coffee drinker knows that they're true.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's certainly reasons why people drink them and certainly for the right reasons because, if you're feeling tired and you need to pick me up, if you have a boost of caffeine, whether that is through an energy drink or, a cup of coffee, of course your alertness is going to increase, and it's like with anything, having it in moderation, no problem at all,
Are you surprised by the amount of caffeine in this particular product, in the Prime product?
Yeah, I was stunned when I was told because I knew that Red Bull already had quite a lot of caffeine in it when you compare it to just a cup of coffee, but this is really increasing that amount a lot. I'm not sure why there has to be so much caffeine in it. Like it's not my area of expertise, but it just sounded like wow, that's going to give you a serious hit, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can imagine, heart palpitations to just sleeplessness that night. But that seems to be the product, and it seems to have an appeal, and the law at the moment anyway seems to allow it. Eva Kemps, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Professor Eva Kemps, who's done a study on energy drinks and their appeal from Flinders University. It's currently 13 minutes to 4 here on ABC Radio Sydney. Quick check of the traffic if you're battling around Sydney. Here's the very latest.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Yeah, on the roads, here is the latest. At Wentworth Falls, the Great Western Highway between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. Multiple vehicles involved in a crash there with significant delays. The highway is closed in both directions, thanks to a number of listeners who've told us that it's really backed up a long way there. So watch out at Wentworth Falls, the Great Western Highway between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. The road closed, the highway closed in both directions. If you're in Bondi Beach, Campbell Parade at Kerr Lewis Street, the lights are flashing yellow. And finally in Normanhurst, Pennant Hills Road at the M1 Pacific Motorway, a car breakdown with one southbound lane closed. That's the latest.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
You remember this ad?
The Dolomites have arrived from outer space.
We make saving fun and easy, whatever the amount. A Dolomite go further in a Dolomite account at the Commonwealth Bank.
Well, it used to be a very simple proposition when you were young. The Dolomites told you that you could put away a little bit of money into a bank account and that amount would grow via interest into a tidy little nest egg. The whole idea was to teach children the value of saving and of compound interest. But it turns out that it's not so simple. Nowadays, interest rates from the big banks have fallen quite a bit below the cash rate. It's a development that's only a few years old. Peter Martin is a visiting fellow at the Crawford School of Public Policy at the Australian National University and joins us here on Drive. Peter, good afternoon.
Good day, Richard.
I guess this is something a lot of listeners would have noticed, the big gap between the interest rates the banks are charging, credit cards, personal loans, mortgages, and the interest rates they are paying out in deposit accounts. Now, we understand there's always going to be a gap between those two things. That's how banks make their profits. But it's such a big gap at the moment.
It's changed. I've graphed, you can see it in the conversation today, get things going back a decade, but I could have graphed going back longer, it'd be the same. Right up until 5 years ago, not only did the deposit rate, and I don't mean, by the way, the rate on transaction accounts, because that fell to 0 years ago, right? Ordinary money you get in a bank account, you don't get nothing and you get charged fees. I mean, accounts where you have a substantial amount of money, the one I used is the online deposit rate, but the others are much the same. Graph that. It used to be that not only did it move exactly with the Reserve Bank cash rate, those announcements, but it was the same. So when which is convenient for people doing calculations, when the cash rate was 3%, that's where the deposit rate was. When the cash rate was 4.5%, that's where the deposit rate was. It fell down. The deposit rate fell right away from about 2018, the 2 years leading into COVID. Right now, it is way below. Now, the cash rate is 3.35%, and you would be lucky to get 1%.
Now, the banks say, oh, no, but, we've got a few accounts where you can get 4%, they say.
Oh, yeah, you can do very well. So long as you don't read the fine print, or if you do read the fine print, you'll find out there's not that much in it. The head of the Bankers Association, Anna Bligh, said, we're giving people 4% now and they could only get 1.6%, after a while. Well, the point is that they could never get that back then and they can't get 4% now. These are introductory rates. This is the trick that electricity companies use, when you switch over. The first 5 months will be discounted. In this case, you'll get 4% for the first 5 months. Then it drops right back. Another trick they use is they call them savings accounts, and you get a high rate. You might get 4%, you might get 3.5%, only if you put more money in each month. 1 month you can't make it, one withdrawal, that's it. You're back to, say, 0.25%. The rates are the ordinary rates, comparing like with like, comparing now with what we used to pay, are far, far lower. Whereas the mortgage rates, given the cash rate, they're where they always were.
So how are they getting away with it? If they didn't used to get away with it, if they used to have just a reasonable gap between the amount they were charging and the amount they were taking, why has that gap grown so much bigger?
Did you used to watch the movies, the early ones, the old-fashioned ones? I'm thinking of Mae West. Mae West was asked in one of them, how did you get to be so, oh, goodness, you're rich? You know what she replied? Goodness had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, yes.
Fairness, right? Nothing to do with it. The reason is, I think, and it's not the whole reason, but lately since COVID, they've been laughing. What have we been doing when we've been locked down or not wanting to spend, go out? We've been saving, the peak was about 20% of our income. Massive savings. This is in COVID, the APRA statistics, the statistics in all the banks, show the banks got an extra 300 billion of deposits, right? That's an enormous amount. As well as that, and by the way, they didn't need to compete for that. They didn't need to offer high rates. People were just sort of shoveling the money in. At the same time, early in COVID, the Reserve Bank, it wanted to support the banking system, I guess as it should have, it gave the banks 188 billion of special funding for virtually zero, just money they could use. Now, so if you've got all that money coming in, why do you need to offer a high rate? You've got enough money to lend out. That's what the banks make their money on, lending out. You don't need to offer a high rate. That's part of the reason why the two fell away, why deposit rates fell away from mortgage rates.
Isn't it partly our fault for not, someone's texting in about ING, they're saying have got a pretty good rate at the moment, and I don't know.
Yeah, ING, by the way, I looked at their pretty good rate, and their pretty good rate has so many conditions. You need to use their credit card. You need to, as I said, for the banks, you need to put money in each month. You need to not move money from an ING account, but move it from outside the bank. If their quoted rate is 4% for this account, but the actual rate, the sort of that you fall back to if you don't meet the conditions, is I think 0.5, about 0.5%.
Okay. So look at the fine print, and it may turn out there's a great rate being offered, but you have to stand on one leg and go to the moon once a week.
Yeah, they use complexity as a weapon. This is what the ACCC and the Treasurer's asked the ACCC, the Competition and Consumer Commission, to inquire into deposit rates. They're going to do that by the end of the year. The last time they looked into mortgage rates, they were of the view that complexity was used to make it hard for people to switch. And people don't want to switch anyway, because people have the view that if money is in a bank, it's safe. If money is in one of the banks that isn't the big four, that used to be called a credit union or something, maybe it's not as safe. And
that's not true. That's not true, though, Peter, is it? Because the government guarantees it all.
Yeah, they're guaranteed regardless. And this offering you money for the first few months is a way of not paying. It's a loyalty tax, not paying the customers who are sticking with their bank, perhaps because of the Dolomites account. And by the way, the Commonwealth Bank only ever got to Interscores because it was government owned. I'm not sure why it's still there. But people suffer because of loyalty, and retirees, it's different, I think, but I think most of us don't really look at what happens in our deposit accounts.
Yeah, self-funded retirees need to, don't they? Because that's, they're surviving on that money. What about I suppose the only thing you can do is have a term deposit. Now, I know that's a restriction of a sort because you can't touch your money for the 8 months or the 2 years or whatever you sign up for, but you can still get a good rate providing you're confident you won't need the money.
Not that good, Richard. Preparing these graphs, I looked at the term deposit rates and they're quite low too. And when I say quite low, I mean they're quite low if your term of your deposit is a year or a month or 3 months. And I think the reason is the same. The banks are flush with money. They don't need to offer high rates to get it. People have been stashing it in, doubtless, in term deposits during the early years of COVID. I'm not sure what we can do. I do think a few things will make it better. One is that there'll be an inquiry. Banks tend to behave better when they're being looked at. The last inquiry subpoenaed, they have the right to demand 40,000 documents from the 4 banks, which I guess would be 10,000 each, right? So that'll scare the banks. Also, the circumstances that meant money was pouring in are ending. We're taking money out now, right? We're spending on overseas holidays and so on. And that special money that they got from the Reserve Bank, they were 3 years at virtually zero interest rate. The last of them expires midway through next year. So the banks may have to work a bit harder for the money, but it's true, if we did shop around, that would encourage them to work harder.
Can we get that? What he's called, Justice Hayne, the one with the evil gimlet eye? Can we get him to do it again? He said to put the fear of God into them.
Yeah, well, the ACCC is pretty fearsome. It's on the case. Although you have to wonder. So they inquired into mortgages and they found that there was, they didn't use the word collusion, they used the word synchronisation in the bank's movements that was convenient for the banks. And, they talked about the thicket of complexity that makes it hard for people to switch. I'm not sure that much has changed since that report, but I do think the banks might improve their behaviour at least while the inquiry's on, which is for the rest of the year.
Well, we can only hope, and by all means shop around, and some people on the text are saying that they feel they're doing all right, but they are agreeing with you that it does, there's often some fine print. Now, it might be a good rate nonetheless, but someone says, we get a good rate at 4.8%, which is a good rate. I have to meet a couple of conditions, like increase the balance each month, but it's manageable since I can flick money in there from another account at the end of the month. And look, that's fine if you've got a really well-organised system like that and you've always got enough money in the other account, but that's not the reality for most people. They're very likely to not be able to make that payment 1 month, or they forget about it even if they can. And as you say, it's quite interesting that you then tumble. You're not just penalised slightly, you tumble right back to the bottom of the queue, really.
Yeah, it's not very good. And as in so many fields, private health insurance used to be the case with mobile phones, electricity, complexity is used basically as a weapon against us to stop us changing or to stop us even being able to compare. What we need actually is, and there are such websites, is a really good website that allows us to compare between bank offers for our own circumstances.
Okay, with all that detail that you're talking about. Peter, interesting to talk to you, and we'll just, hope for some change, but in the meantime, check the fine print. Thanks very much for talking to me. Peter Martin from the Australian National University has been writing about this topic today on the Conversation website, where you can see those graphs he's prepared, showing how, go back 5 or 10 years, and it used to be better, but not anymore. Lots coming up on Drive, including the pots and pans and the fears about Teflon, and, well, some good news about that, actually. It's news time now, 4 o'clock.
afternoon. Adam Story with ABC News. 7 people have been taken to hospitals across Western Sydney following a multi-vehicle crash in the Blue Mountains. Danuta Kazaki reports.
All lanes are closed on the Great Western Highway between Leura and Wentworth Falls in the Blue Mountains after a crash involving a truck and 6 cars this afternoon. The New South Wales Ambulance Service says the 7 people taken to hospital include a child at Westmead Children's Hospital. 3 people have been taken to Nepean Hospital, 2 have been taken to Westmead Hospital and 1 person to Liverpool Hospital. There are reports of at least 1 man with serious injuries. Motorists are being urged to avoid the highway between Leura Mall and Scott Avenue and use the Bells line of road as an alternative route, with police investigations expected to take some time.
The State Emergency Service says there have been more than 800 calls for help across the state due to severe thunderstorms overnight. The hardest hit areas were Sydney, the Hunter region, the Central West and the Southern Tablelands. Sydney alone received more than 350 calls for assistance. The SES says there have been 14 flood rescues yesterday and today, mainly people in cars trying to drive through floodwaters. Meanwhile, many households remain without power in Sydney due to the thunderstorms. More than 400 households and businesses are still without power in the inner Sydney suburb of Darlinghurst as crews remove hazards and other debris. Homes in southeastern Sydney and the northern beaches have also been impacted. The Prime Minister says Australians with average super balances won't be affected by any suggested change to super tax concessions. Treasurer Jim Chalmers this week raised concerns that Australia is on track to spend more on super tax concessions than the age pension by around 2050. Anthony Albanese says no decision has been made, but it's important to have a discussion.
There's nothing that impacts the sustainability of the system from punters out there who've got $150,000 in their accounts. That's not an issue at all.
The first home buyback offers have been made to flood-affected residents in northern New South Wales. Bronwyn Herbert reports.
The Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation's Chief Executive David Witherden says the first buybacks have been made, with more to come.
Our target is to have 250 offers on the table by the end of April.
The buybacks are jointly funded by the state and federal governments through a $700 million Resilient Homes program. Greg Florey from North Lismore is one of 6,000 households registered, but still waiting for answers.
Definitely forgotten and frustrated.
The Reconstruction Corporation says around 2,000 offers will be made for those homes at the highest risk.
New data from the Bureau of Statistics shows more Australians are receiving scam text messages. Here's business reporter Amelia Turzon.
The Bureau's latest fraud survey shows the percentage of people who are noticing a scam-like attempt is up 10% in a year to more than 2/3 of people. The biggest rise is in scams that are coming over text message, such as the headline-grabbing Hey Mum scam that's reported to have cost Australians more than $7 million so far. The good news is that Australians are getting wiser on scams. The amount of people actually falling prey to these scams is down around 1%. More people are also reporting sus attempts to authorities like the police.
China's top diplomat and Russia's security chief have held talks amid concerns Beijing will increase military support to Moscow. Here's East Asia correspondent Bill Birtles.
Wang Yi is visiting Moscow just days after US President Joe Biden stood shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine's leader in Kyiv. After meeting Russia's security chief, the pair expressed opposition to what they call unilateral bullying and a new Cold War, referring to the US. Mr. Wang's visit, 1 year since Russia's invasion of Ukraine began, is being closely watched, with Washington concerned China might start to directly provide military support to Russia. While not ruling it out, Beijing has lashed the US, saying its continuous supply of arms to Ukraine shows it's in no position to lecture China. Ahead of the Russia trip, Mr. Wang said the partnership with Moscow will withstand any changes in the international situation.
The United States could bar tens of thousands of migrants arriving at the US-Mexico border from claiming asylum under a new proposal. It means the US would generally deny asylum to migrants who show up at the southern border without first seeking protection in a country they passed through. To the weather for the remainder of the afternoon, showers in the east with possible heavy falls. There's the chance of a shower elsewhere as well, also the chance of a thunderstorm across the west and the northeast. Showers should ease during the afternoon in Sydney. Partly cloudy tomorrow, the slight chance of a shower, a top of 25. Partly cloudy Friday, the slight chance of a shower as well. ABC News.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover
on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Hope you're having a good afternoon today. The PM promises no big changes with superannuation, but what of the 80,000 accounts with balances over $2 million? Do they remain in his sights? Also today... push to heat-proof our cities and a visit to the place that's leading the charge. That's Self-Improvement Wednesday. And later... over 60 firms with surprising results for productivity. You'll hear from the New Zealand business leader who kicked it all off and the latest from that UK study. It's all ahead here on ABC Radio Sydney, on radio at 7:02 a.m, on the ABC Listen app, on digital radio, on TV's Channel 25 and, of course, online everywhere. A quick check of the traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Especially the problems in the Blue Mountains, which are slowing things down a lot in Leura. At Wentworth Falls, the Great Western Highway between Leura Mall and Scott Avenue, multiple vehicles were involved in a crash there not so long ago. About, I think, 1:30 it happened. But it has led the highway to be closed westbound. Now, the eastbound, we've got one lane closed and one lane open now. So lane 2 remains closed eastbound, but it's entirely closed westbound still. The Great Western Highway between Leura Mall and Scott Avenue. Bondi Beach, Campbell Parade at Curlewis Street, the lights are flashing yellow. And in Normanhurst, Pennant Hills Road at the M1 Pacific Motorway, a car breakdown there with one southbound lane closed. That's the latest.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio
Talking about this energy drink Prime, which is being promoted very heavily by these two social media influencers who are incredibly famous, it seems, among anyone under about 16. For anyone my age, you've never heard of them, but there are amazing shots of them with just hundreds and hundreds of young fans, for instance, outside the Today Show studios the other day. It turns out this drink they're promoting, Prime, has got 6 times the amount of caffeine of Coca-Cola, 6 times the amount of caffeine of a can of Coca-Cola. It also says on its website, should not be used by people under 18, and yet obviously all of the customers, all the fans, by just the evidence of one's eyes, are under that age group. And also it's pretty expensive and hard to get, maybe hard to get by design in order to create a kind of race for it. We heard from nutritionists saying about the dangers of caffeine at this level and saying that really it wouldn't be allowed, and except for the fact there's a loophole by which if you label the product a dietary supplement, you can load it with caffeine in a way that you wouldn't be able to do if it was just advertised as a soft drink like Coca-Cola. 6 times the amount of caffeine of even Coca-Cola. Helen in Camaray says, yes, my 11-year-old son's peer group are all talking about this Prime drink. Apparently costs $15 a bottle. Some of them have purchased it. They are heavily influenced by the dreadful Logan Paul. That's the appeal. It's all nonsense, but clearly targeted at young, easily influenced boys who think it's cool. That's from Helen. And from Adam, my kids lined up at Woolies at 6 a.m. today to get Prime. I suppose it's at least getting them out of bed. But yeah, 6 a.m, that's the sort of scarcity thing that they're trying to promote, I suppose. Someone says this is heartbreaking. Talking about energy drinks, my niece died in her sleep after drinking one. She had an undiagnosed heart condition, which made her heart race. She was just 18 years old. Heartbreaking text. A high level of caffeine is the addiction hook, says Gaz, for this product to grow and keep sales. Nicotine and alcohol have worked well for other things. That's from Gaz. Yeah, it's just the addiction to caffeine part of it. And in terms of the banks and Peter Martin talking about the deposit rate being so low compared to what they're charging for loans and mortgages and credit cards, maybe we need to establish a federal government-run bank like the Commonwealth used to be prior to privatisation. That could add much-needed competition to the Big Four. Yeah, the more things change, yeah? 1300 222 702 is our number. If you want to text, 0467 922 702. Here on Drive.
Hi, it's Philip Clark. Join me Monday to Thursday from 10 p.m. for Nightlife. We cover everything from history to finance to the day's biggest stories. We've got everything you need to get you through the night. Monday to Thursday from 10 on ABC Radio Sydney.
I wonder if you're someone who worries that the coating on your frying pan is contaminating your food, potentially, of course, contaminating you and whoever you're cooking for. There's been concern recently with the chemical PFAS that has been used in firefighting foam and in other products. So what's the story with Teflon frying pans and other types of pans? Oliver Jones is Professor of Chemistry at RMIT University. He's written about this in an article in today's Conversation. And before you start throwing out your Teflon pans, the news is actually pretty good, pretty reassuring. And Oliver Jones joins us here on Drive. Oliver, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
The Teflon, it is true that Teflon used to be a problem. There used to be a problem with Teflon.
Well, not quite. So Teflon is still used. What happened was that you used to use PFOA, which is a type of PFAS, to make Teflon, but that hasn't been the case since 2013.
So they changed the formula in a way that made it safer, really right back in 2013.
Yes, I mean, I'd argue it probably wasn't a problem in 2013, but in order to be a little bit safer and take precautions, they stopped using PFOA in the manufacture of Teflon.
Okay, so but what if you've got a Teflon pan that is a decade old? Should you consider throwing it out?
Personally, I wouldn't. But if you're worried, if it's all scratched up and damaged, then maybe replace it. If you're concerned, replace it. But there's not really many of them around, I don't think.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but in terms of more recently purchased Teflon pans, you still hear people say, "Oh, you must throw that out once the surface is damaged." You're saying that's kind of an old news attitude.
Yes.
Because of the change. Yeah.
Well, I'm saying if you've got sometimes people say there's little black flecks coming off into their food and they don't want to eat that. Well, that's sort of a reasonable attitude. You don't want to be serving food with particles in it, but they actually probably just pass straight through anyway. Mm-hmm. So if you have got a damaged lining, by all means replace it, but it's probably not a health problem.
Okay, and the way they make Teflon now is safe. It doesn't have these PFAS chemicals in it.
Well, not quite. So Teflon is the trade name for PTFE, which is itself a PFAS. But it's not one of the ones that are really... There's a bit of a difference between PFAS in kitchen materials and PFAS in heavily contaminated sites, such as, near firefighting foams, contaminating water, etc. Mm-hmm. So we have to be aware that it's two different situations.
And in terms of a well-made modern pan, it's not the same as living in a town where the firefighting foam has been used.
No, it's not. And we have to remember that Teflon's been around since the 1940s, and it's been used in pans since about that time, and many other products, and we're all still here.
Mm. Now, let's say talking about non-stick pans for a while. Some of them are Teflon, but the others are titanium ceramic coatings. What are they, and are they safe as well?
Yeah, they're perfectly safe. So there's actually two different types of ceramic pans. Most of them are sort of a metal base with a ceramic coating, and there's other ones that are just pure ceramics.
And either way, that's fine?
Yeah, I've read a few reports online where people were saying potentially the lining could come off, but I'm a bit dubious about those personally.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you about a few other things. I've heard people say, and again, this might be old news, but I've heard people say they're worried about aluminium pans. Things like teapots, for instance, that you could sometimes find an aluminium teapot. People were worried that there might be a link with dementia.
Yeah, that's another sort of chemical myth. Well, actually, even the Alzheimer's Association deems that a myth. So there have been concerns since dates back to about the 1960s, where people thought this might be a problem, but it's been disproved quite a while ago.
In fact, it seems to be based on a 1965 study involving rats and large amounts of aluminium that was never really stood up.
Yes, I think it was rabbits actually, but they thought if they fed rabbits large amounts of aluminium that they developed these sort of tangles in their brain that looked a bit like Alzheimer's symptoms, and therefore that sort of morphed into aluminium causes Alzheimer's, which then morphed to anything made of aluminium that you might touch causes Alzheimer's. So people started avoiding pans and cans and all sorts of stuff, but that association was then proven to be a mistake. So, even all the Alzheimer's and dementia associations don't say, they don't think it's a problem.
Okay, so aluminium fine, Teflon fine. What about copper? Because copper sounds like it could be dangerous, and yet copper cookware is actually very trendy.
There's something about copper sort of glistening away on the shelf. It looks very nice. Copper's used a lot in cooking in pans because it heats up sort of smoothly and evenly, so it's very easy to control the temperature, particularly if you need a fine temperature control. So that's why you see a lot in professional kitchens. Again, it's sort of similar to the concerns about aluminium. People think that copper might come off into your food and you'll get a high dose of copper. And copper's one of these things that you need some of it, but too much is bad for you, and it can make you feel nauseous. And there's various sort of excess copper diseases you can get, but those that you won't get that much from a copper pan, right? You have to be eating huge amounts of copper for a long period of time.
And most of the copper pans have linings, don't they, to stop you?
Yes, quite a few of them will have most of them have this lining, which doesn't. So the food's isolated from the copper anyway.
What about pewter? In a way that will alert you to how odd people were when I was a young man. I used to be bought these copper beer mugs, pewter beer mugs for my birthday by my godfather. I've still got a selection of them from 1 year old, 2 years old, 3 years old. But then I read that pewter is terrible because it's got lead in it.
Well, modern pewter is, it depends how old it is. Right? I think in the distant past, pewter did have small amounts of lead in it, which isn't obviously very good for you. But that's not been true for goodness knows how long. Mm-hmm. So modern pewter is lead-free.
Okay, but maybe I'll steer clear of the beer mugs that were given to me in 1958. Maybe they're old enough.
Sort of old decorative ones, they're probably, yes.
But maybe they're old enough. The other thing that a lot of people are into these days are cast iron, if you can afford it. Those beautiful French cooking pots, and they Quizettes and so forth. I think there's some cheaper brands, but that sort of thing. Are they safe?
Yes, nothing wrong with. Pretty they're heavy. Sometimes they don't heat up as well as other pans, and they're harder to clean, but they're perfectly safe.
Mm-hmm. And finally, a question without warning on the text. Would you put the Teflon pan into the dishwasher? Does that affect it?
That's a good question. So it depends a bit on the temperature of your dishwasher. Generally, you wouldn't be washing Teflon pans in a dishwasher. I can't imagine why you do that, actually. But
well, because it's easier than doing it yourself, Oliver.
Well, yes, but you might damage them. I mean, there's two things. So Teflon is stable up until about, I think it's 250 degrees C. If you heat it consistently above that level, you can start to get some fumes coming off, which aren't good for you. And there's been some, if your dishwasher is operating above 250 degrees C, you might get some damage. And then when you open it, the fumes you might breathe the fumes in. But again, it would be a very low dose even if you did do that. Mm-hmm. But personally, I wouldn't recommend putting Teflon pans in the dishwasher because they're not stick. The whole point is to be able to wipe them clean.
Yes, that's right. They should be quite easy to wipe clean, and the whole point is you don't have to put so much olive oil and so forth in the pan to begin with. Well, it's nice to talk about chemistry and about chemicals and all of that, and to have the conclusion actually we're pretty safe.
No, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, good on you, Oliver. Oliver Jones is Professor of Chemistry at RMIT University, saying that a lot of the questions about Teflon, well, he didn't really think they were much of a problem anyway, but the formula change back in 2013 became safer. And certainly in terms of aluminium, that the fear about that dates back to a redundant study from 1965, when the bunny rabbits were served far too much aluminium for their own good. It's currently 18 minutes past 4 here on ABC Radio Sydney. Now, I wonder if you saw some of that incredible lightning last night. Over 22,000 lightning strikes hit within 100 kilometres of Sydney last night, with the North Shore, northern beaches and eastern suburbs copping the worst of it. Some places recorded more than 100 mil of rain, with Terry Hills in Sydney's north getting 121 millimetres. Jenny Parks is the SES Deputy Unit Commander for Warringah Pittwater and has been on the ground during the clean-up today and joins us here on Drive. Jenny, good afternoon.
Hi, Richard.
Can you describe some of the scenes you've seen?
Well, there's been a bit of wind, which has brought some tree branches and some big trees down all over the place. But most of the jobs have been water coming into people's homes.
Mm. Now, the trees that have come down, they're mainly over roads. They're not into houses, into buildings?
We've had all sorts. With the SES, we only go in where there's emergency access is blocked or for property protection, so if a tree is threatening to fall onto a house. So there's some of those that we haven't been able to do today, but we've done as many as we could. All the ones that have come down over driveways, for example, where they've been blocking access into the house, we've done those. Wow, that's a lot of work because there were a lot of them, weren't there? Yeah, there sure were. Yeah, I think 820 incidents across the state, 356 in Sydney Metro and 14 flood rescues. The trees are a combination, obviously, of the wet ground, the sodden ground, and then you get wind. Yes, that's right. And there was a fair bit of wind last night with those storms. Mm-hmm. Downed power lines as well, I read. Yeah, we had a couple of jobs there where we had to wait for Ausgrid to come in and turn off the power to the homes before we could go in and remove tree branches. Mm. And how many volunteers did you have out there on the field? Last night there were 5 in my team and 5 again today. Across the whole state, I have no idea, but it would be a pretty high number. Okay, and because this all came on, I mean, I know there were a bit of warnings that it might be a big storm, but I think it was bigger than anyone thought. So for the volunteers, describe the process. You just get rung up at home and suddenly you're running in, do you? Well, last night was actually our unit meeting, so we had most people here on site ready for the meeting. We were supposed to be doing some training on how to use pumps, and in the end that got cancelled and we went out and actually did some real pump work. And how much sleep did you get? I finished last night just about 1 o'clock and I drive half an hour home from the unit and then I was woken up again at 6 with a call out, so that's less than 4.5 hours. 4.5 hours. Oh, you must be so tired, poor you. Everyone appreciates what you do, though, Jenny, and good luck as the cleanup continues. Thank you. Yeah, there you go. Don't they work hard? Jenny Parks, the SES Deputy Unit Commander for Warringah Pittwater, which was one of the worst hit places last night. But yeah, lots of damage right across Sydney Metro and yeah, indeed the state. It's currently 22 minutes past 4 here on ABC Radio Sydney. Coming up, finance.
ABC Listen.
So tell me, what's the question that people ask the most on the Dr. Karl podcast?
Everything in the entire universe, from haematology to biology to geology. Was there really a big bang? What happens when I have dark urine in the toilet? And finally, why is the sky blue?
But mainly just farts.
Lots of farts.
Dr. Karl and Dr. Lucy have all the answers on the Dr. Karl podcast. Find it on the ABC Listen app.
22 past 4. And Ian Verinder is here, our ABC Business Editor. Good afternoon.
G'day, Richard.
Yeah, the market down again today.
Yeah, down about 0.3%, but we actually opened up quite heavily down. It was not quite 1% down, but it was getting close to that. That followed some fairly heavy falls on Wall Street overnight, down more than 2%, and the tech stocks bore the brunt of that overnight. Confidence again being rattled by, well, are we going to have a recession or are interest rates going to go higher or are we going to get both? Mm-hmm. And so it's there's a lot of, I guess, confusion about what the future holds. But
don't mention the word stagflation, Ian.
No,
come on.
And look, it wasn't helped as well by some data that came out last night from US authorities where there was a record decline in US home sales. So it just kind of illustrates that, in fact, it was the 12th straight decline. So
is that about rising interest rates in the States?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's that same kind of, I guess, confusion we're going through here. What does the future hold, and how much further can they push interest rates?
Now, Domino's Pizza had a huge drop in share price today. Why was that?
Well, look, there was within that fall that we had today, there was some really quite dramatic differences. Domino's was far and away the biggest loser today, down 24%. So a huge drop in the Domino's share price today. They released their profit results. They weren't as good as expected. They sliced the dividend, if you can excuse the pun.
Oh, gosh. You've been working that one up.
Oh, look, I think it's been used a fair bit today. And look, sales really underperformed. They like to get a 3 to 6% growth in their sales, and they were well down on that. So the market didn't like it one bit and really dumped them. Origin, on the other hand, the big energy company, that was up around about 13%, and primarily because there was a massive takeover bid launched last year by a Canadian group, Brookfield, and an American private equity firm, about $18 billion worth. When the federal government stepped in to regulate gas prices, a lot of people in the market thought this is the end, right? They're going to pull the plug on the whole deal. Anyway, they came out today and reaffirmed the deal. They have dropped the price from $9 down to $8.90, so they haven't dropped it by very much at all.
So all the sky is falling, people. Yeah, maybe overdid it a bit. These wages growth figures are out today.
Well, now which particular spin would you like on the wages growth? Because we can do one or the other. We can say wages are now growing at the fastest pace in a decade, or we can say the opposite and say it's the largest decline in real wages on record.
Oh, okay, because the inflation rate is so high that
That's
even a bit of wages growth is a big gap. Yeah.
So the wages for the quarter grew 3.3%, up only slightly from the previous quarter, from 3.2. But, when you take into account that we've got inflation at 7.8, well, then you've got a real wage decline of around 4.5%. So, a lot of workers are really taken in the neck at the moment when it comes to how much money they have to spend. And, all the fears about a wages spiral because of rising prices, it really isn't happening at all. And, again, we talked about Coles profit yesterday. Well, today Woolies came out. Now, here you've got Coles yesterday reporting a 14% jump in net profit. Woolworths today, well, their like-for-like sales in terms of profitability up 25% during this period. So both of them have been struck on a 4% rise in revenue. So only a smallish rise in revenue, but this massive jump in profitability.
Okay, so even though they're saying the farmers are charging too much for the potatoes, they're obviously adding an extra profit onto it.
Margins are widening quite dramatically. So they've cut costs in a whole range of areas and they've managed to widen margins. Now, Coles put a neat little definition of this. They call it smart selling. Yes.
Very smart.
Yeah, it's very smart.
If you're a Coles shareholder.
Yeah.
Now, the All Ords and the dollar, what were they?
So the All Ords today down about 1/3%, 7,517. And the dollar quite a bit weaker, down 68.30. And that's because there's a reduced expectation that the Reserve Bank may have to raise rates particularly hard, given that the wages data came in softer than expected.
Okay. Good on you, Ian. There's Ian Verandar, our ABC business editor. Let's check the latest traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
Jeff Wallace is here for the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. In the mountains, earlier serious crash blocking westbound the Great Western Highway, Wentworth Falls. Now they've reopened one eastbound lane near Lura Mall. And Carlingford, a person's been knocked down on Pennant Hills Road, northbound Carlingford Road. I'm seeing the back of the queue coming past Jenkins Road up towards Marsden Road. Commonwealth Parkway, very slow. Fox Valley Road up towards Pennant Hills Road. And the M2, very slow from North Ryde, heading out towards Pennant Hills Road and the M7. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. Coming up, the news headlines.
ABC Radio Sydney.
Evenings with Indira Naidu.
Hey Indira, how are you?
I
Welcome.
am so well, thank you. I'm so excited to be with you on Evenings. I just want to pack in a lot of fun, and you'll be very happy to know that we're continuing with the iconic quiz.
Hi Indira, welcome to the quiz.
Thanks. You are going to get a fridge magnet.
Yeah, I'm a winner already.
Evenings with Indira Naidu.
Weeknights from 7.
ABC Radio Sydney.
Some news headlines. Adam Story, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. The State Emergency Service says there's been more than 800 calls for help across New South Wales due to severe thunderstorms that hit overnight and this morning. The hardest hit areas were Sydney, the Hunter region, the Central West and the Southern Tablelands. The first home buyback offers have been made for flood-affected residents in the state's north. The Northern Rivers Reconstruction Corporation says it wants to make offers to at least 250 residents by the end of April. The Prime Minister has sought to reassure Australians with average super balances they would not be the focus of a potential overhaul of super tax concessions. The opposition leader Peter Dutton says changes to tax concessions will create uncertainty for people looking to invest in their retirement. And Russian leader Vladimir Putin isn't ruling out meeting China's top diplomat this week as US concerns mount that Beijing might provide Moscow military support for the war in Ukraine. More ABC News at 5 o'clock.
Thank you very much. We'll have the day in politics in just a second. A few interesting texts coming in. We're talking particularly about these caffeine-based drinks, like Prime is the one that's having really heavy marketing from these social influencers who are out here in the country at the moment. It's apparently costs something like $15 a can, and has the caffeine level 6 times a can of Coca-Cola. So it's incredibly caffeinated, and parents have been writing in about how enthusiastic their kids are. Often, 13, 14-year-old kids are about this product. One listener said their kids were lining up at 6 a.m. outside Woolworths, so anxious that they could buy a can of the stuff. This is from Jen. I'm a school counsellor and was referred a child with severe anxiety. The parents couldn't work it out. In his assessment, I ascertained that he was allowed to drink up to 6 cans of Mountain Dew, that fizzy drink, per day. With my poor mathematics, I worked out that he was having so many tablespoons of caffeine and sugar per day. We cut out the fizzy, and hey presto, the parents got their chilled boy back. No diagnosable illness there, just a sensible parenting. So isn't that interesting? That's with Mountain Dew, which presumably is like either Coca-Cola level or less. Imagine if you were having this Prime drink with 6 times the caffeine of Coke. This is fun. Richard, last week you did a segment on libraries and how wonderful they are. I just wanted to shout out to our local library in Camden. Every afternoon it's filled with students either waiting for a connecting bus or for a parent like me who use it as a kind of babysitter. The kids wait there while I'm on my way from work. The librarians make them so welcome, even if they're just sitting on their phones. I've even heard one of them take a phone call and then make an announcement. It was a parent with a message for their kids that they'd be there soon. Not the librarian's job really, but really a great sense of community there at Camden Library. And today my daughter borrowed a book. So there you go. That's lovely. I hope someone from Camden Library, one of the librarians, is listening to that shout out. In terms of super, what are you worried about when the government talks about changing super? The Prime Minister today said there'll be no big changes, but he did imply that there might be some changes at the margin. So I'm imagining that change in the margin might be about people who've got very big balances. There are apparently 80,000 Australians who've got more than $2 million in super, which is kind of weird because you can only really take an allocated pension off 1.7 million. That's the limit at the moment. So if you've got 2 million or 3 million or 5 million, is that money really just a way of saving money as part of estate planning to save money to hand on to the next generation? I mean, that's of course fine. Everyone's got a right to hand over money to the next generation, but do you necessarily need to build that up in such a tax advantageous way, in a way that might be costing other taxpayers billions of dollars? The other suggestion that has been around is and worries people, and worries the super industry too, by the sound of things, is the idea that the government might mandate the use of funds. So they might say to the big super funds, hang on, you've got to at least invest 1% of your money in housing, for instance, in affordable housing, or you need to invest at least 2% of funds in the renewable energy sector, something like that. Now, that's not something the government's particularly said, but it is something that people are worried about. For instance, this texter here, I think a lot of people are concerned about the proposal where the government wanting trustees to direct money to social housing, aged care, energy, renewables. They quote David Murray's review saying it's not the government's money, it's the members' money. You should not direct the trustees in a particular way. It's not the place of government to direct members' money. If you distort the members' asset allocation, you distort the returns, and that can be harmful. And that's certainly what the industry has argued. They say they've got a mandate to, that's the deal. You invest the money with them, and they try to get you the best return they possibly can, given the level of risk you're willing to put your hand up for. Any other change to that requirement is really going against the spirit of superannuation. I think there was something in what the Treasurer said the other day that seemed to agree with that, but I know people are still worried about it. The 4-day week, which we're going to talk about a little later, this big study in the UK where they got lots of companies to actually test it out, and for I think 6 months, and see how it worked. You pay people the same. They only work 4 days a week, but the idea is, because you've given them that extra day off, they're much more focused when they are at work. They've had time on that other day to do anything, do their banking, pay their health insurance, all those other life administration tasks. And when they come to work, they're focused on it. They're grateful for the company for doing this. And the claim was always that productivity would go up. So what's happened in this big test case, I suppose, of whether it works? Well, the answers are pretty positive about the 4-day week, and we'll go over to the UK a bit later and bring you exactly what they've found in terms of productivity, employee happiness, and also employer happiness. So that a little later. Just a note on that, though, from Nathan. He says, I once worked for a company in Newcastle who did the 4-day work week, and it was just great. It meant more time to spend on my jiu-jitsu and look after my dog. So very happy about that. We talked a lot about inflation, of course, and Ian Verrinder was just talking about it there. Yeah, there's been wages growth, but the trouble is the inflation growth is so much stronger. And so there's this ever-growing gap, your real wages going down and down and down. And, of course, the sign of this is around us everywhere. What's your inflation indicator? What have you noticed where you think this really is? I don't need a story in the newspaper or on the radio to tell me about the rate of inflation. I can see it in this thing that I buy all the time. What's the thing you buy all the time, or at least the price of which you're aware of, where you can tell that inflation is really going up sharply in Australia? What's your inflation indicator? Mine is, I tend to bring in my lunch, but just to make myself angry, I look in the little canteen they've got in the foyer here at the ABC, and the toasted sandwiches are $14.90. $14.90. It's just, it's not. I think it's nice bread. I think maybe they break it themselves or something. I don't know. Maybe it's from Golden Wheat, but it's $14.90. I think how can a sandwich be $14.90? It's a cheese and ham sandwich. I'm aware that they're no longer $4.90, but they shouldn't be $14.90, should they? What's your inflation indicator? If mine's the toasted sandwich, what's your indicator that inflation really is pretty strong? What's the product you're really aware of the price of? 1300 222 702, and on the text 0467 922 702. Here on Drive.
The quest for the big brass mug continues. On the new season of Hard Quiz, award-winning comedian Tom Gleeson is throwing down the gauntlet to some new contestants.
You made that sound really creepy.
And challenging some more unusual expert subjects.
That's when you thought things wouldn't get weirder. Sam, colonoscopies is your expert.
The new season of Hard Quiz.
Nothing's weird on this show, mate.
Wednesday nights on ABC TV and streaming on ABC iView.
Yeah, down to Canberra in a second. Look, this is interesting in a way. Can we, this is from Michael in our retirement, on superannuation, can we move on from this very upper middle class super discussion, please? Don't we have more important issues? I agree that this business of people having $2 million is a very small number of people. In fact, we know the number. It's 80,000 people who accounts more than $2 million. I don't think it's an upper middle class discussion, though. This is something that costs the tax. These 80,000 people cost you, Michael, and me and everybody else $3 billion a year. That's what the Grattan Institute estimates is the return to the Treasury would be $3 billion a year if you manage to get rid of the tax concessions for people who've got more than $2 million in superannuation. So I don't agree it's an upper middle class discussion. I think it's a discussion for every Australian who pays tax, whether you really want your tax dollars to be going to give people a tax shelter when they've already got $2 million in superannuation. But yeah, please go on and feel it's a middle class discussion that doesn't touch you, because I think it does touch you. I think it touches everybody.
Members on my right.
Well, hang on.
Members on my left.
I will not be lectured about sexism.
You sit down. Order. Mr. Speaker. Google it, mate.
How pathetic. What sort of person does that?
Order, bullhead. The day in politics. Joining us is Brett Worthington, our ABC political reporter. Good afternoon. Yeah, Brett, superannuation we've been talking about a little. The Prime Minister gave his press club speech, of course, and did claim at least that he wasn't planning any big changes.
Yeah, so the government's really talking up that it's not doing any major overhauls of superannuation, and I think that this kite flying exercise that we're seeing again at the moment, which came from the Treasurer at the start of the week, and then we've seen his assistant out this morning, and now the Prime Minister, is very much wanting to soften up people for any potential changes that could well come. But I think you can very much guarantee that it will be focused around those people who have the highest amounts of money in their superannuation balances, kind of in the tens of thousands of people at levels that we're talking about, more than $5 million in their superannuation balance. So Anthony Albanese is wanting to make it clear that for the bulk of the nation, they won't be making changes to any tax programs they might see with their super, but for those at the other end of town, there will be a slightly different change.
I mean, he was relatively explicit about that. He said, and what we're talking about here is, well, there's nothing, he said, that impacts the sustainability of the system from punters out there who have $150,000 in their accounts. That's not an issue at all, and that is the average amount. And he's right, that's the average amount, $150,000. Although it is interesting, again, these are Grattan figures, that 2/3 of Australians have less than $100,000.
Yes, and then you saw, we were speaking earlier, Richard, about people then took out money during the pandemic because they got access to it, and you saw the superannuation balances drop as a result of that because people needed to gain access to money. Now, that's a policy that the new Labor government criticises the former government as having. But it's also got Labor walking this awkward line where it is both very proud of superannuation as a broader policy. It doesn't want to be putting out any suggestion out there that it's looking to tax it more for the bulk of the nation. But it's also very conscious that before the 2019 election, it did take a whole suite of tax measures, and some of those would have affected superannuation. And Labor was spooked after losing that election. And so whether or not you see some small tinkering at the moment and then a broader conversation ahead of the next election could well be where we're heading if there's any broader tax changes that could well be happening.
Of course, the opposition is saying you're talking, at whatever level, you're talking about extra taxes, and you said there would be no extra taxes. Here's the opposition leader, Peter Dutton.
People might have had a windfall from a house sale. They might have inherited some money. They might have sold their small business and rolled that money into superannuation. In that scenario, if they've invested in shares or in a portfolio which has gone up significantly in value, they've done it according to the rules, and they've done it because they want to support their retirement. And if the Labor Party is changing the rules and taxing your superannuation, why will people invest in super?
I mean, it's an interesting political argument, isn't it? Whatever the rights and wrongs of it, the coalition is saying, super is sacrosanct. On the other hand, you are talking about only 80,000 people who are in this category of having more than $2 million, of which the average balance is $3.8 million.
And I suspect that all of that nuance will go out the door when it comes to the political debate, Richard. I think Peter Dutton is renowned as being a blunt instrument with the political attack that he will look to launch against Labor. And Labor, if it's going to have to explain the intricacies of its policy, it will be struggling, because as soon as you're explaining the ins and outs of it, it's going to be so much harder to get across. So it sounds a lot of. I mean, it is a winnable argument, I think, in that if you're an average person and you got $150,000 or $100,000 in superannuation, and somebody says this other person's got $4 million in it, and it's in this tax environment which costs the taxpayer $3 billion a year, then it does seem pretty tough on the average taxpayer. I think one of the other issues that the government faces is it does feel sensitive to attacks about anything that can be tangentially linked to cost of living at the moment. And if the coalition is going around running a political campaign that says the government is looking to tax even more of the money that you've got in your accounts now, you saw how that worked with franking credits ahead of the 2019 election, where people who didn't even have these things were suddenly terrified that they were going to be taxed. So it's a political argument that Labor is going to have to be as tuned to as much as a policy type argument as well.
All right, well, let's listen a bit to the policy argument side of this. This is the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services, Stephen Jones. He was on ABC News Breakfast this morning. He said the government is looking chiefly at what he described as mega-sized superannuation balances.
This is not about the government saying people can't save more than $5 million, $10 million, $100 million for their retirement. We're saying what is a reasonable contribution that the Australian taxpayer through the budget should should be making to assisting people save for retirement incomes. To put that in context, the average superannuation fund balance at retirement is around about $150,000. That's a long, long way from $100 million. We've got to have a debate about how much we are willing to subsidise these mega-sized superannuation balances.
Okay, I mentioned the $100 million fund that apparently is around there somewhere. Ian Verrinder mentioned it yesterday. Brett Worthington is with us, our ABC political reporter. Meanwhile, the Home Affairs Minister, Clare O'Neil, says Australia's migration system is in desperate need of a fundamental overhaul. She says far too many people are coming as temporary migrants and not as a sort of permanent migration that we celebrated in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, so Clare O'Neil points to the fact that there's been the reversal of what there should be happening, where she thinks that the focus should be on permanent migration, like you say, and that you see far too many people coming in, having to work for a temporary amount of time and then leave the country. So at the moment, they've called in Martin Parkinson, the former head of the Prime Minister and Cabinet Department, to look into this and to bring ideas to the Home Affairs Minister and the government about what they could do. One of the things that, like the reason we avoided a recession for almost 3 decades, which was largely a product of growing the nation. So that migration was a huge element in what helped Australia stay ahead of a lot of other nations economically. But the trouble that with the pandemic was you saw a complete reversal, where you saw a net exit of people coming to the country rather than a net increase of people entering into it. Now, you are starting to see those numbers start to tick up again to getting back to pre-pandemic levels, but the government is concerned that still the focus is too much on temporary workers and not enough on permanent migrants, who they then argue would invest not just in the country in the short term, but over the longer term as well, which they would argue offers greater longer term economic benefits to the country.
Let's hear the Home Affairs Minister, Clare O'Neil.
Today, it is relatively easy for a low-skill temporary migrant to come to Australia, but difficult, slow, and not particularly attractive for a high-skill permanent migrant to come here. So we have the system pretty much exactly backwards. Our migration system has been on continental drift for a decade. Australia's migration system is broken. It is unstrategic, it is complex, expensive, it's slow, it's not delivering for business, it's not delivering for migrants, and it's not delivering for the nation.
Yeah, there you go. There's Clare O'Neil. Brett Worthington is with us, our ABC political reporter from Canberra. Just finally, the ASIO is warning that the country is facing an unprecedented assault from foreign espionage agencies.
Yeah, so Mike Burgess gave his 4th speech last night. He does his annual update on the threats posing the nation. Now, he's the ASIO, the domestic spy chief and one of the nation's most preeminent intelligence officials. He highlighted a couple of issues, talking about how foreign governments have been trying to lure journalists and judges and bureaucrats to gain more information that can be used by a foreign government about what is happening here that could be used to an advantage down the road. But also talking about how, as much as, of course, there are spies that are within communities that are spying for foreign governments, Australia is doing the same, that it is happening in elements that go beyond what might otherwise be anticipated, and that they've been able to highlight and capture a couple of these cases in the last year.
Yeah, and it does sound as if he was saying, look, don't think this is some sort of romantic Cold War thing that's all past. It's here and now and at really strong levels.
And I think that Mike Burgess has been someone who's wanted to, in many ways, bring the spy agencies out of the shadows where they largely carry out core business. They talk a lot at the moment about cyber attacks and cyber threats, and I'm sure listeners to your show on the daily are potentially getting text messages or calls coming in, and everything from what is happening there to what is a more organised foreign government that is in and spying within our nation. There is cause for concern for the nation's spy chiefs, and when they look at major projects like the AUKUS deal and submarines and billions of dollars in defence contracts, they are concerned the extent to which projects like that are being monitored as well, and spying is occurring in those sectors.
Let's listen in to the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. He was on RN this morning saying that foreign interference and espionage is a big threat to national security.
We're very lucky to have someone of the calibre of Mike Burgess who provides these threat assessments every year for the last few years. And what Mike has said, and the view that we share, and Minister Clare O'Neil and others have been talking about this, is that foreign interference and espionage is a big threat to our national security, and ASIO works around the clock to try and protect Australians from it. It's deliberately designed to undermine our democracy and our values, and it shouldn't be tolerated by the government or its agencies, and it's not tolerated.
Yeah, Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer. And from the other side of politics, the LNP Senator Matt Canavan was on Channel 9 this morning. He said that many political and business leaders are just too eager to take money from China.
The claim here that senior figures, I think political and business leaders, Mr Burgess claims, kind of convince him not to go after spies, to go soft on our foreign adversaries. That doesn't shock me so much because there is a bit of a fifth column, I find, that kind of want to just shut up and take the money from the Chinese. I think that is ridiculously short-sighted. If we get too close and too addicted to a sort of a financial flow of rewards, that will come back to bite us down the track.
There you go. There's Matt Canavan bringing an end to Brett Worthington's political report. Brett, thanks so much.
Thanks, Richard.
There's Brett Worthington, our ABC political reporter in Canberra. We're talking about inflation with Ian Verinder and the fact that even though wages are up, of course, the inflation is up by even more. So you've got this decline in real wages still. What's your indicator of inflation? What's the product you know about? And so you're kind of absolutely aware of the way the prices have risen. I mentioned the toasted sandwich that's available around here for $14.90. How can a toasted sandwich be, basically $15? What about you? What's the thing that you've really noticed and really focused the mind on the degree of inflation at the moment? William says, I purchased a litre of milk the other day for $3.10 for some unknown reason. I did a mental conversion and went truth. £1, 11 shillings, and a pound of butter is about $8.50. It used to be that means it's £4, 5 shillings. This is from Emma in Clovelly, I spend $100 on weekly groceries, normal stuff, milk, bread, fruit, veg, usually come home with up to 6 bags. Yesterday, the same amount spent with the same items shopped left me shocked as I looked at my 2.5 bags. So she's spending the same money, that's the money she's got to spend, and getting basically 2.5 bags rather than 6 bags. Bernie says, my inflation indicator is dry dog food. 7 kilogram bag last year cost $22. Same brand this year, $32. That's from Bernie. And yeah, I think grain is one of those things that really has gone up a lot, hasn't it? So maybe they use a lot of it in the dried dog food. Is that the reason? My medium decaf latte is $6.09 at Curability. Says Philippa in Ramwick, $6. And you don't even get some caffeine. Cat food nearly doubled in 2 years. Bega cheese up $2 for the 500-gram block. That's Nick's indicator. Another vote for cat food. A box of 12 pouches has gone up from $9 to $12.50. It's costing me a fortune to feed my cat Charlie, says Gordon in Newtown. It's Charlie, you better keep looking cute. That's all I can say. You used to be able to buy a bottle of wine for $12. Now that seems to be the minimum price for a glass, says Heather. And what about this? $4.10 for a bottle of water at the gym. What about the price of Madura leaf tea? It's $6.60 a box now, says Viv. And from Mary, the 200-gram jar of instant coffee I buy has gone from $14 to $22. What's your indication of the level of inflation at the moment? Rebecca's here from St Mary's. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, how are you?
Good. What's your most notable inflation indicator?
Well, it was only last night, and I sent my teenager to the fish and chip shop to get a scoop of chips and 3 scallops with $10, and she came running back to me to the car saying she didn't have enough money because it was $13.50.
$13.50 for a scoop of chips and 3 scallops, 3 potato scallops.
Yeah. She was mortified and embarrassed,
Yeah.
and she tapped to go with her card because Mum's got no clue about the price of chips.
All right, the price of chips. You were spitting chips and so was she. Good on you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
There you go. What an inflation indicator, $13. And an embarrassed teenager too, has the price having gone up so much. Oh dear, pet food is high. It's a first world problem, says Mark. Well, not if you've got to feed a pet. Maybe not everyone's as wealthy as you, Mark. Maybe that's the problem. Dog food is about $3 extra per 6-pack, says another. And this from Susie, I like vanilla frozen yogurt. The current one on the shelf at Coles is $9.90 for 500 mils. That's almost $20 a litre. It's ridiculous. It is currently 6 minutes to 5 here on ABC Radio Sydney. It's Pat Stack from the Sport Daily podcast. Pat, good afternoon.
Good day, Richard.
What's your inflation indicator?
Well, I was walking to get the public transport home after work yesterday, and one of the local pubs around Ultimo had a big sign up saying beer at happy hour starting from $4.50, and I nearly fell over on my way running in there because I thought, geez, that is cheap. And I thought about the last time I bought a schooner.
So you're a young father now. There's no more drinking. That's all over.
That's what they said. They stopped me at the door and asked for ID, and I said, "I've got grey hairs. Surely this isn't a problem." They said, "Yeah, no, but we hear you're a father now. There's no more beer to be had." I was like, "Okay." But yeah, most recently, I think I paid somewhere in the vicinity of between $9 and $13 for a schooner, so somewhere between 2 or 3 times the price of that establishment that is, a Chinatown establishment that is flogging very cheap beer indeed. And I thought, gee, come to think of it, that's a lot to spend on a schooner of beer that doesn't actually deliver me much.
Try buying a glass of Chardonnay. It's ridiculous. There was some place I went. It was
wooded or unwooded though.
I like the wooded.
I'm old. Don't we all?
I'm old school, man.
Yeah, big buttery thing.
If you're not
put the chips in it.
We're talking about spitting chips. If you're not chewing on the oak,
I'm with you. I'm actually with you. I hate to say it. I'm actually aligned with you on the potato one.
Yes.
Isn't there a potato famine or something going on as well? So isn't there aren't potatoes in short demand as well?
Frozen potatoes. The potatoes are fine, but frozen potatoes are in short supply. Yeah. And Woolworths and Coles are apparently limiting the numbers of bags you can buy, and you're only allowed to buy, like a 2-kilo bag. Now, Mark talks about first world problems. I do think that is a first world problem, because if you can't survive on 2 kilos of frozen chips a day, you're not trying. Now, the Super Rugby kicks off this Friday.
Yeah, and look, in and of that self, a season launching, I think, is quite a boring story. But the fact that I've used this as the way to get into our daily sport podcast topic tells you I actually think this is quite an interesting story, because rugby, as a consequence of re-engaging with Eddie Jones, has lit a little spark of interest in the sporting community. It's got our attention all of a sudden. So the question we're posing today is, can they hold it? What do they need to do to hold it? And we spoke to Georgina Robinson from the Sydney Morning Herald, who is very good. I have a habit of getting carried away with optimism or pessimism one way or another. Mm-hmm. And I'm feeling vaguely optimistic around rugby in this country at this time, which is a strange feeling to have, given we won 5 out of 14 tests from a Wallabies perspective in the last 12 months. But and she has a great habit of sort of keeping it on an even keel. And when she looked towards this Super Rugby season, there's a lot of reason for encouragement. They've signed 3 seriously big names to contracts when they look like they might go overseas. As I say, Eddie Jones has sort of got everyone re-engaged again. You've got the Waratahs playing a season opener against their famous rivals, the Brumbies, this Friday night at a brand new stadium. While they haven't been able to draw a crowd of over 20,000 in 7 years, there's murmurs that they might be able to get 30 at this new venue in Moore Park. So can they sort of, I guess, galvanise and seize the moment to generate some ongoing interest in what is a season that's essentially going to be used as a series of trial fixtures for the Wallabies World Cup hold?
So what's her theory? I mean, what do they need?
The short answer, which is boring, is winning. It's literally simple as winning. So can the Waratahs or the Brumbies or the Reds, you think the Rebels and the Force probably can't do it this year, get some sort of momentum together, give Australian fans reason to engage in a year where we're going to be taking on strong teams from the Pacific, much stronger teams from New Zealand, and keep us relevant and in the mix, just to get us into that sort of space where we're going to be playing internationals against big nations in a World Cup year. I mean, they say winning cures all ills, and that is the short answer. Winning.
Well, it's interesting to hear on our morning show a discussion of the difference between the Rugby World Cup and the Female Soccer Cup.
Yes.
The Female Soccer Cup is a much bigger event now than the Male Rugby World Cup.
Can you give me context? Like, are you talking globally?
Yeah. It's the Women's World Cup, he was saying, goes the Olympics, the Male Soccer World Cup and the Female Soccer World Cup are the 3 biggest sporting events in the world.
I'm going to take you on your word, Richard, but it doesn't surprise me in some regards, because you're talking about a sport that is just so universally loved and acclaimed. And so in the same way that if you consider that the AFL will tell you that I think 40 or 45% of their supporters are women, it'd be the same for men's football. So it makes sense that the female incarnation of that would be generating such significant interest. I know that the US women's national team is paid the same amount as the men's side, and well might they be, given they generate more eyeballs and greater sponsorship clout than the men's side. So really encouraging to see those female sport.
Okay, but it's another sign that rugby needs to, get going. Now, good news for Cam Smith fans.
Yeah, so the Australian golfer is going to be free to defend his British Open crown. And, you think of him winning the British Open, you think, well, why wouldn't he be able to play? Well, the reason is he's engaged with the Live League, which is the Saudi-backed golf league, a source of much controversy and derision. And the question was, once he had won that, would he be allowed to compete at the British Open? Well, the organisers have come out overnight and said, yep, he will be. It's called the British Open for a reason. It's open. And if you have the means to qualify, we're not going to just ban people willy-nilly. And he has done just that. He claimed a victory there in its 150th incarnation. He's going to be there to defend it in its 151st.
Good on him. Hey, good on you, Pat.
Cheers.
There's Pat Stack. And we're talking about the $13 for chips and 3 potato scallops. Good heavens, Richard, never thought I'd live in a future where a sandwich would cost $15. Old enough to recall when a meat pie cost 10 cents. And from another. As a kid, we'd buy 60 cents worth of hot chips. One arvo, we gave Peter from Springwood Charcoal Chicken 55 cents because we were 5 cents short, and he accepted it. It's 5 o'clock.
Good afternoon, Adam Story with ABC News. The State Emergency Service says the Hunter is the latest region to be hard hit by severe thunderstorms. There have been more than 800 calls for help across the state due to the storms last night and this morning. Sydney alone received over 350 calls for assistance, with parts of the northern beaches and Sydney's east receiving torrential rain. SES spokesperson Alicia Dooley says today's focus has been Maitland.
Our main areas that have been hit have been Maitland today, where an isolated burst came through of 75 jobs at about midday today. This required some sandbags for a couple of shops and childcare centre in the main areas.
Meanwhile, the unit commander for Warringah Pittwater, Jenny Park, says Sydney's northern beaches have been one of the hardest hit areas, with water coming into homes. She says many large trees also came down in the strong winds last night and this morning.
So there's some of those that we haven't been able to do today, but we've done as many as we could. All the ones that have come down over driveways, for example, where they've been blocking access into the house, we've done those.
One lane has been reopened on the Great Western Highway in the Blue Mountains following a multi-car pile-up. Danuta Gazaki reports.
The accident happened just after lunchtime this afternoon, with the highway closed for hours between Leura Mall in Leura and Scott Avenue in Wentworth Falls. 7 people, including a child, have been taken to hospitals across Western Sydney. Police say a man believed to be in his 50s is in a serious but stable condition with suspected hip and rib injuries. The accident involved a truck and 5 cars. Motorists are being urged to avoid the area, with only one eastbound lane open and all westbound lanes of the Great Western Highway closed as police investigations continue.
The Prime Minister has sought to reassure Australians with average super balances they would not be the focus of a potential overhaul of super tax concessions. Nicole Haggerty reports from Canberra.
Super contributions are taxed at a lower rate than other forms of income, with employees who make additional contributions also enjoying a lower tax rate. But more than 11,000 Australians have super balances over $5 million, prompting a warning from Treasurer Jim Chalmers that Australia's on track to spend more on super concessions than the aged pension by 2050. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says those with the average $150,000 balance won't be hit by any changes.
That's not an issue at all.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton says changes would be detrimental.
Wages are growing slowly, but at a rate still well below inflation. With the details, here's Daniel Ziffer.
The Wage Price Index, or WPI, rose by 0.8% in the December quarter, helping to lift annual growth to 3.3% for the year to December. The annual pace of wage growth lifted marginally from 3.2% in the previous quarter, according to new Australian Bureau of Statistics data. The figure is below what analysts had predicted. The result may reduce the pressure on the Reserve Bank to lift interest rates as it attempts to stem high inflation. But people's real wages are falling because their purchasing power is being eroded. The Consumer Price Index is currently at 7.8%, and that's far higher than wages are rising.
And that wages data helped regain some losses on the local share market today. The ASX 200 lost 0.3%, went on 7,314, and the Australian dollar currently trading at 68.3 US cents. The NRL's player pay dispute has led to the threat of further action ahead of the start of the 2023 season. ABC Sports' Daniel Garb reports.
Just 9 days out from the opening game of the season, the NRL has cancelled its season launch amid the ongoing collective bargaining agreement dispute with the players. Parramatta star Junior Paulo says the players will take action if they need to as they stand firm on their demands, but is confident of a resolution. The Roosters' Victor Radley says the players are being fair.
I know that we're all on the same page, and we know that what we're going for is fair and what we think is right, so we're going to hold on to that.
The players say the two parties aren't where they need to be just yet, but they are moving in the right direction.
And Christian Welch will captain the Melbourne Storm for a second consecutive season. The Storm announced his reappointment of the 28-year-old and says the front row will have three new vice-captains, Harry Grant, Jerome Hughes and Cameron Munster. A few showers and the chance of a thunderstorm in the northeast tomorrow. There's the chance of a shower elsewhere in the east as well. Early fog patches in the southeast. It'll be dry and mostly sunny in the west. For Sydney, an overnight low of 19, followed by a partly cloudy day, the slight chance of a shower and a top of 26. That's ABC News at 5:05.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover
on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. I hope you're well. Today, the PM promises no big changes with superannuation. But what of the 80,000 accounts with balances of over 2 million? Do they remain in his sights? Also today... the push to heat-proof our cities and a visit to the place that's leading the charge. It's Paris. That's Self-Improvement Wednesday in about 10 or 15 minutes. And later still... and, of course, online everywhere. Talk about what your indicator of inflation is. What's the product you know quite well, and so you think, look, I don't need to read a newspaper study here on the radio what the inflation rate is. I get it because of this thing I buy or I'd like to buy all the time. We heard from the lady who sent her teenager off to get the usual order, the $10 of chips and 3 scallops. Suddenly it's $13. The kid doesn't have enough money. That's a measure of inflation. Me walking past the sandwich shop and seeing the toasted ham and cheese sandwich is $14.90. How can that be? How can that be? Liquid clothes detergent, says Paul, is something I noticed going up. It used to be $20 for 2 litres, but Colesworth regularly had it on special for $10. Now it's $26, hardly ever on special. This product would be highly machine produced. You can buy the same brand for about $8 overseas. One of my horse feeds says, we don't have many listeners who have horses, do we? But this one does. One of my horse feeds has gone from $30 a bag 18 months ago to $64. That's inflation. And this is kind of good too in terms of what's happening. Inflation indicator, my bulk billing doctor now charges $75 for a visit. So that's the other thing that's happening, isn't it? The medical system and the number of bulk billing doctors is going so sharply down. What's your inflation indicator? What have you noticed that really brings home to you the price, the rate of inflation at the moment? 1300 222 702. On the text 0467 922 702. How do you measure it? Is it the money you pay for a product, or like the listener who texted in, you've still got the $100 that you use at the supermarket every week, and instead of coming out with the 6 bags you used to come out with, you now come out with 2.5 bags. Is it a measure of that, the amount that you can buy from the money you've got? It's 8 minutes past 5 here on ABC Radio Sydney. Let's quickly check the traffic.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
And then this intriguing statement from the boss of our spy services that Spying is not some sort of romantic Cold War thing. It's absolutely going on in Australia at the moment. In fact, at an ever-increasing level. We'll talk about that in a tick. At Carlingford, Pennant Hills Road, at Baker Street, the lights are blacked out. Heavy traffic conditions affecting all directions. At Wentworth Falls, this has been the bad one of the afternoon. Great Western Highway between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. Multiple vehicles are involved in a crash there earlier in the afternoon. The highway remains closed westbound with now one eastbound lane open. So one lane closed, one lane open eastbound, but entirely closed westbound. Bondi Beach, Campbell Parade at Curlewis Street, the lights are flashing yellow. And Carlingford, Pennant Hills Road at Carlingford Road, a car and pedestrian accident there with one northbound lane closed. Last one is Galston Road at Calderwood Road. 2 cars involved in a crash, both directions affected.
You're with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
Well, more Australians are being targeted for espionage and foreign interference than at any time in Australia's history. So says ASIO Chief Mike Burgess. He made the comments as part of his annual threat assessment, saying ASIO had identified a hive of spies seeking to steal sensitive information. Sarah Kendall is from the law faculty at the University of Queensland, and she joins us here on Drive. Sarah, good afternoon.
Hi, thanks for having me.
He kind of counselled us, I suppose, not to think of spying as some sort of romantic Cold War notion that you might find in a novel, but something that's very much here and now. Do you agree with that?
I would, yeah. I think ASIO has definitely said that espionage is on the rise here in Australia. In Australia,
you've written a piece about it in the conversation. The one critical thing you say is you wonder why we're not prosecuting more people.
Yeah, so back in 2018, the federal government actually overhauled our espionage offences. So prior to 2018, we only had 4 counter-espionage laws. And then come 2018, we actually introduced 27 new offences. Now, these offences are quite broad. They're quite tough as well. They prescribe up to life imprisonment if you're convicted. So we introduced these really tough new laws in 2018. But since then, these laws haven't actually been used at all. And this is despite the ASIO chief saying that, they discovered a hive of spies that was identified and disrupted.
And it sounds like they just sent them home, does it?
Yes, yeah, they were just removed from Australia.
Is that the best thing to do, though? I mean, maybe that's the best thing to do rather than create an ongoing tension, diplomatic tension with whatever country they're from.
Yeah, perhaps. So I can't really comment on what the best course of action is, but definitely if we were to prosecute foreign spies, there are all those diplomatic considerations do come into play.
But you still wonder, I suppose, why we introduce these laws if we're not going to use them.
Precisely, especially because we introduced so many laws, they're so tough, they're so broad. So there is a question around, are these laws really necessary, or are all of them really necessary?
Or are we better to not have such laws but to keep on getting rid of the people, which just seems to be what we're doing. Hey, Sarah, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
There's Sarah Kendall from the Faculty of Law at the University of Queensland talking about, the fact that we introduced all these laws but seem to be committed to not particularly using them. We just show people the door. 20 degrees in the city, 20 in Camden, 21 in Gosford, 12 in Mount Boyce, 20 in Penrith, 20 in Cronulla. A 70% chance of showers today, most likely easing in the late afternoon. Tomorrow, a minimum of 19, a maximum of 25. Partly cloudy with a slight 20% chance of a shower. It's currently 12 minutes past 5. Coming up, Self-Improvement Wednesday will be on your radio with a trip to Gay Paris.
The Queen Victoria building will be renamed in the lead up to World Pride.
With James Valentine.
Well, the QVB is obviously such an iconic Sydney building, so it's sending this message of acceptance, celebration and inclusion.
And is there anything else like this? A building's being lit up?
The entire city will be one giant rainbow during Sydney World Pride, James.
Weekdays from 5:30.
You won't be able to turn your head and not see a rainbow.
ABC Radio Sydney.
The self-improvement in a second, but what's your inflation indicator? We've heard about cat food and horse food and laundry powder and hot chips and avocados. What's the product where you're aware of it? You're aware of the price of it. Rebecca is on the line. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Richard. My dad fell out of bed last week, and so I thought I'd go and make him a big lasagna, 8 slices, so he'd have, lots of meals. $50 nearly it cost me to make a homemade lasagna of 8 slices.
Wow. So that's mince meat, a couple of cans of tomatoes, and some milk and flour for the white sauce, right?
Well, it was $16 for a kilo of mince. It's got mozzarella, parmesan, and tasty cheese, so they were $8 a packet.
Wow.
The fresh lasagna sheets, a litre of milk, and a few other things, and I nearly died.
Because that's it's a lovely meal actually. It's one of the great meals, but it's supposed to be something which can feed a lot of people with not so much money, right?
Well, I was thinking, I know why people go to the supermarket freezer and buy the $16 frozen one.
Yeah.
It doesn't taste as nice, but
yours.
Do you know what I mean?
I haven't tasted yours, Rebecca, but I know it's going to be nicer, right?
Yeah, thank you.
and also made with love for your dad, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So that beats the frozen one. Good on you, Rebecca. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. $50 for a homemade lasagna with just the price of cheese and the price of the mince and the milk and, well, everything else. What's your great inflation indicator? The product that used to the price of and you're amazed by the price now. My son buys chicken breasts, $11 per kilo. It's cheaper than the $31 kilo dog treats, but it's an identical product. So people are saying substituting homemade stuff from the commercial stuff because the commercial stuff is so expensive. Aldi facial tissues have gone from 95 cents to $2.49. Inflation is here and everyone is feeling it. What a price rise. I can't do the maths on it. Get Adam Spencer in, but 95 cents to $2.49. What sort of percentage increase is that? 1300 222 702. And someone else says Tim Tams. They don't give me the prices. They just say Tim Tams. What about you? What's your inflation indicator at the moment? 1300 222 702 or on the text 0467 922 702. Are you one of our regular students for Self-Improvement Wednesday? Each week you get to learn something new. Your lesson this week, urban cooling, done well. Your teacher is Associate Professor Sebastian Fauch from the School of Urban Studies at Western Sydney University. Good afternoon.
Hello, good to see you.
I thought we might just start with a little bit from Simon Marnie's weekend show, just this last Sunday. It was the Mayor of Blacktown City Council. His name is Tony Bleasdale, and it was very hot weather last weekend, so Simon got him on the radio to say this.
Well, a cool centre is a location where families, anyone can go along on a really hot, severe day and cool down. And what we do, we have air conditioning within them cool centres. We have cold drinks. We have all kinds of activities for children to participate in whilst they are cooling down.
Okay, the idea of a cool centre already being tested in Blacktown City Council with the Mayor Tony Bleasdale. But of course, this is a worldwide phenomenon, isn't it? And some cities are really quite advanced in it.
That's right. And I mean, Blacktown is the hottest part of the Greater Sydney Basin. They really need to crank it up a bit more than having a single cooling shelter. And that was only a trial. There were big issues around how to actually pay for the space? Or if you use an RSL, how do you not get people into pokies that are only coming for cooling? So it's a tricky one because we don't have the infrastructure yet.
Okay, so let's have a good hard look at Paris, because they've had a huge problem with heat in the past, including big mortality rates during hot summers.
I don't know if you remember 2003, but they had tens of thousands of people dying. It was the holiday season, summer holidays. The families were gone and the oldies were left behind. And they basically died of dehydration. And it was extremely tragic to see. Totally preventable.
And traditionally in Paris, there's something about Paris, I don't know what it is, but the temperatures traditionally have been 10% higher than in the surrounding countryside.
That's right, Richard. And think about, picture Paris. It's lots of heritage-protected buildings. 4 stories high apartments. You can't clonk air conditioning systems on these. It's forbidden. All the palaces, all these historic buildings cannot have air conditioning as we know it, where you just put something on the roof. The structures wouldn't hold. So they needed to come up with ideas of what else can we do? And they did fantastic.
And they certainly did. So they've gone from 2003, when the excess mortality rate from the heat wave then was plus 142%.
Staggering.
Compared to anywhere else in France. Now, they've had a recent, in 2019, so a relatively recent occasion when they also had a heat wave, and yet the mortality rates were nothing like what they were in 2003.
Yes, and they're predicting that they will go down and down and down because of all the measures that were implemented. We can talk about these measures. I have to say, even in 1991, because of this building associated issue with not having air conditioning on the outside, they needed to come up with something else and started building an underground cooling system for the city center of Paris. And that's the world's largest urban cooling system today. It's an incredible piece of engineering. About 100 kilometers of pipes underground that suck in the water from the River Seine, use that, supercool it down to 4 degrees, and then pipe that into palaces, into the Ritz, the Louvre, hospitals, everything. They've got thousands and thousands of square meters millions actually, of square meters of urban building space that they cool down with this system.
Okay, that's an important part of this big engineering project, but it's not the only part, is it? They also, for instance, they have climate-adapted schoolyards.
Right. They also plant microforests where they can. A very interesting aspect about what Paris is doing is a process they call demineralization. It's ripping up surfaces and making them permeable for absorption of stormwater, which then helps later on cooling. That includes green roofs, streets, car parks, roads, walkways, everything. There are lots of measures that are implemented. We see misting in nearly 50 public spaces where when it's hot, they just switch the misting systems on. We have walking apps that give you the coolest route from point A to B, where you can just check where you have the coolest conditions to walk through the city. So they're doing, as I keep saying, a multi-pronged approach, not just giving out little icicle poppy sticks for the kids, but really looking into how can we cool the entire urban space down to make it more comfortable for people in summer.
I like the idea of splash fountains. Tell me about the splash fountains.
Yes, the splash fountains. They actually are open for you to have a dip if you want to. Try to think of a fountain. I can only think of 1 or 2 in the city centre here in Sydney. In Paris, you have dozens of them. They're just a feature.
So you could jump into the Hyde Park fountain without getting arrested.
Correct. Yes, have some fun out there. Also, of course, that means they look after the air quality, about the water quality from those fountains, so that you're not getting sick jumping in there. You have to provide for these kind of things, but it's possible. It's showing us that it's possible. That's the important message. It can be done.
Okay, the demineralisation is something we can learn from in Sydney, isn't it? We've talked about this before, the amount of hard surfaces we've managed to build into our city, which, of course, just attract the heat, don't they?
Yes, and store it and then re-radiate it into the night, which gets our nighttime temperatures up, which is a huge problem because it's at night when we don't recover from those very hot days, and we see hospital admissions going up because old people really suffer.
Is that right? So when you're talking about mortality in heat, it's really the nighttime temperature that's more significant than the daytime temperature.
That's right, because during the day your body tries to cope with the heat, but during the night it needs to recover from it. And if it can't recover, and we see that from 2 to 3 days of heat waves every time across the Sydney Basin, it's that time just after you had, 3 hot days, 2 hot nights, that hospital admissions go up because your body tries to cool down. And that means even if you don't have any body action, even if you lie down, your heart needs to pump the blood through your body much harder. And that already causes heart attacks, cardiac arrests, and so on by old people, which are very vulnerable to those kind of conditions.
Now, a number of cities worldwide have signed up to this. Paris is obviously the leader at the moment, but this is a worldwide movement, isn't it?
And part of it belongs to what Sydney also has signed up to, which is a project by the Rockefeller Foundation across 100 cities, the Resilient Cities program, worldwide. But as you said, Paris is leading the pack and Sydney is far behind when it comes to these integrated measures of providing cooling in public spaces.
Okay, out of the things that Paris is doing, what are the most urgent things on your list for us to copy?
Demineralization would be very high up. Ripping up the hard surfaces, providing much more light, coloured, open surfaces, much more green roofs, not only on office buildings, but also on residential buildings, provide incentive programs. We've seen this in Portland, of how great in Oregon, Portland, this works. When you have an incentive program, you suddenly have an industry that can provide the services. And even if you drive the incentive programs down, the experience is now in the system, and the uptake of green roofs in Portland has remained high. So you even have.
I mean, when you say green roofs, you mean with plants growing on them.
That green stuff. Yes.
Not just coloured green.
No, you can't just paint them green, Richard. Yeah. You have to put some substrate on them. There are extensive, so low maintenance, and intensive green roofs. Here in Sydney, we had a very nice study from a building near Barangaroo that combines green with solar. And it was showing, this was actually from UTS right next to you, was showing that the green roof that had solar on it worked better and produced more energy more efficiently because the greening helped to cool down the solar panels. And therefore the solar panels worked more efficiently by generating regenerative electricity. So it was just a really nice example of how you can combine the technologies that we have today available to us and make them work for us.
But even if you don't go to that degree, the colour of the roof is important, isn't it? You see so much in so many. Monument is the current trendy colour, right? And it's a very dark grey. It's almost black, really. And
after all these years, I don't know if your listeners want to hear me talking about black roofs again, but it's just not going away. It's one of those things where I really bang my head against the wall. It's such an easy change. And we even have technology available to retrofit. So if you have a dark roof, and I've got colleagues that come to me now and say, hey, Sebastian, what can I do? I've just got a new roof. And I tell them there are products out there, even made in Australia. You can actually retrofit your dark roof without a big cost and make it light coloured. And
they kind of resurface it, do they?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They spray it on. And it makes a huge difference instantly.
It's such a weird thing, isn't it? Because I think Monument is a very attractive colour, but, use it on your front door or something. Why put it on the roof? You can't see it yourself.
And then you start painting your driveway in that same colour, which, of course, brings all the heat down to the ground and into your house as well from the ground level, not just from the roof level. So there are some very strange things happening in our urban design at the moment.
Okay, so demineralisation, as they call it, maybe number one, but a few fountains that you could prance around in, and a bit of misting sounds pretty good as well.
Yeah, with the misting, I'm still critical, particularly in our climate, because there are some maintenance issues with clogging, if you don't use it for half a year because you don't need it, you need to flush it, you get the nasties out. So there's a bit of work that needs to be done, how to best use it in a climate like in Sydney.
Okay, but misting you could do.
Well, that is misting.
Oh, I thought
that is misting.
But you don't have to make sure that's particularly clean. It's fresh water, isn't it?
Well, you would absolutely use fresh water. Otherwise, you send people through a mist of nasties.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Misting is great. It's immediate cooling. We've just seen it at the Australian Open in Melbourne being used, where you had misting stations. It works fantastic. We have no misting publicly on a large scale anywhere in Sydney. I can't think of a place.
No.
Maybe your listeners do, but I can't think of a place that provides that kind of technology.
And I know this is only a small part of the mix, but can we have some bubblers back? I know there are a few, but we were talking about school bags with Anna-Louise Bouvier yesterday, and she was encouraging kids to with these overloaded backpacks, she was encouraging kids to take your empty water bottle to school and fill it up at school. And people said, that's all very well, but we've only got one tap at school. We've only got one bubbler at school. Sometimes it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I've been advocating for more of those drinking water fountains in playgrounds, for example, where we built a demonstration site in Western Sydney, a UV Smart Cool playground. One of the big aspects to bring in there was drinking water, because if you stay hydrated, you stay cooler. Public drinking water fountains would be great.
Okay, let's bring a little bit of Paris coolness to literal coolness to Sydney. Thank you very much for the lesson.
ABC Radio Sydney Traffic.
And Jeff Wallace is here from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. On camera, the M4 Granville. Now, 2 lanes have been shut down. It's just past James Roos Drive, the lower viaduct section, the far right, as you head west out towards the Cumberland Highway. They're doing emergency work, but I'm seeing delays back towards Auburn. You can get west on the M4 through Granville using the far left lanes on the upper viaduct. Wentworth Falls, earlier serious crash, still blocking the Great Western Highway near Lura Mall westbound. Eastbound one lane's been reopened. And Paddington, breakdown for Oxford Street citybound near Young Street. I'm Jeff Wallace from the Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. Just a few notes about the various ways of making the city cooler. There are a few cases of misting around the place. The Newport Hotel apparently has some misting, and Parramatta Park has a cafe with some misting, says Neil. Harris Farm, but they use the mist to make the vegetables heavier. Are we on to their secrets, are we? There were some misters in some parts of Mardi Gras Fair Day on Sunday, and it did make a massive difference. We needed a lot more, though, says Jess. Le Coq Restaurant in Rozelle has some lovely misting, says Sean in Lilyfield. And what else? What other methods? We're talking about the ColourBond roofs, but Lee adds, what about the fences too? I'm always amazed at the number of ColourBond metal fencing in Adelaide. The heat it generates must stick around for ages in the atmosphere. There must be an alternative to that as well. And those monument roofs, this colour, this dark grey colour that everyone's really into at the moment. Jeff says, Richard, monument will be the olive green and burnt orange that we had in the 70s. I'm a builder. I'm so over it. Surf mist is the best roof colour. That's from Jeff. Yeah, monument will look so burnt orange in a few decades' time. That's his prediction. 5:30 is the time here on ABC Radio Sydney. Coming up, Anne Hollins will be here for midweek conference. I wonder what your inflation indicator, though, is. Jeff is here from Oyster Bay. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, how you going, Richard?
Yeah, the product that you've noticed that's just an indication of how much inflation's going on.
Yeah, so in our office, I buy my team every Friday a fruit flan, just as a small gesture of thanks for putting in so much hard work during the week. And I've noticed that the cost of fruit flans have gone up from about $25 to $38.
$38.
I know.
Yeah, that's huge, isn't it? I mean, good on you for appreciating the staff and all that, but it makes it pretty difficult, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and I have to tighten my budget a bit too. So we celebrate instead of celebrating Fruit Flan Friday, we celebrated Frozen Friday. So I bought everyone a paddle pop instead.
Frozen Fridays at Jeff's workplace. Hey, good on you, Jeff. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Richard.
Yeah, there you go. The price of fruit flans, the price of chips and 3 scallops. We've heard about the price of cat food and dog food, of laundry, liquid detergent, of Tim Tams, of avocados, of making a lasagna for Dad. Our caller said now $50 to make a simple lasagna to take round to her dad's place. It's 29 to 6. What's your inflation indicator? Let's take some news headlines. Adam Story, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. There have been more than 800 calls for help across New South Wales due to the storms that hit last night and today. Sydney alone has received more than 350 calls for assistance, with parts of the northern beaches and Sydney's east particularly hit with torrential rain. A number of residents and businesses are still without power. Meanwhile, more than 9,000 households in New Zealand are still without power, more than a week on from Cyclone Gabrielle. Periods of heavy rain are expected in Hawke's Bay from Thursday through to Saturday, and some in rural areas are facing weeks before they have their power restored. The Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neil says Australia's migration system is broken and backwards and is in desperate need of a fundamental overhaul. She's lamented what she says as the staggering drift away from permanent migration towards a focus on temporary migration. And apprentices and trainees in regional areas will now be able to apply for a $250 travel card. The state government says the initiative will run as a 2-year trial. More ABC News at 6 o'clock.
Adam, thank you. Anne Holland's in a bit. Tom Saunders is also here. I'm listening from New Zealand, says one of our texters. Can you wish my friend Joe in Brookvale, who's also listening, a hello, enjoy your inflation wafer, is the message. So good luck to Joe in Brookvale from NZ. What a great Self-Improvement Wednesday, says Daz. Of all the segments you've come up with over the years, self-improvement is just the best. Thanks to the team. That was they're always pretty good, aren't they? But that was a great lesson from Sebastian. Tom, the weather and lots of it, really. Last night was pretty intense, wasn't it?
It was insane, those storms. I mean, the key feature, Richard, of the storms last night was the slow movement. Often when you get a thunderstorm, it lasts about 20 minutes and you might end up with 10 or 20 millimetres. But because they were moving slowly, we had hours of heavy rain. Terry Hills was the wettest suburb, 127 millimetres. Mm-hmm. That's a month's worth of rain, and most of it fell in just a few hours. It was their heaviest fall in 3 years. Another big one was Belrose, 116 millimetres. So it was the northern suburbs where we had the heaviest falls.
And I talked to the SES a bit earlier, and that's where their efforts were concentrated today. So many trees down.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was mostly from the heavy rain as opposed to gusty winds that normally bring down trees. Now, the trough responsible for the storms moved up to the Hunter this morning. So parts of the Hunter have had over 100 millimetres today. And now the worst of it's moved up to the mid-north coast. There's still some light showers over Sydney. I can see them on the radar. But the easing trend will continue overnight tonight. And then tomorrow, well, back to normal weather, we'll say. Partly cloudy for Sydney. There's still a chance of a shower, about a 30 or 40% chance in most suburbs. And a temperature range 19 to 25 for the city. And 23 to 25 across the whole city, so not much variability for the maximum tomorrow.
This is always the point when talking to you, Tom, where I have to remember which day of the week it is. Give me a moment. So that was Thursday. What's Friday?
Yeah, I struggle as well. Sometimes actually live on air when I'm doing the 7-day forecast, I muck up the days. Friday is 2 days away. Yeah, partly cloudy, 26.
Thank you.
And there's still a slight chance of a shower. So the next couple of days, you've got me laughing. Slight chance for shower for the next couple of days. Saturday, mostly sunny, 27, and Sunday, partly cloudy, and a top of 29.
All right, and the weekend?
That was the weekend.
Oh, that was the weekend.
We've lost the days again.
I'm going to have a spreadsheet when you go.
I'll hold it up in front of you. I'll point at the days.
Exactly. We'll see you on the news tonight. There's Tom Saunders. Let's check what's on tonight's edition of PM.
David Lipson here on PM at 6:30. 3 days into the new COVID booster regime, doctors are waiting for stock of the latest shots due in a few weeks, and patients are tossing up which one is best in their arm. Also, as the Indian diaspora grows, there are fears that caste discrimination is happening in Australia, and calls to follow the US city of Seattle, where it's been outlawed.
This is a huge historical, cultural baggage which is coming here. And if it gains ground in Australia, and if we are talking about racism and rights of people, we need to start thinking about caste as a big issue.
That's PM coming up at 6:30 tonight.
Yeah, hot roofs and inflation indicators. There's some of the things we're talking about this afternoon. Banana bread has gone from $18 to $33. Ouch, says Brett. Crystal kitty litter, now $23 a bag. Used to be $17. Doesn't sound too much, says our texter, but it all adds up, especially as I'm trying to be a responsible cat owner and not have the cat chase wildlife. And in terms of the coloured roofs, Richard, around Gladesville, there are new houses with the outside walls clad in black ColourBond cladding. That will have the aircon working overtime. It's total madness, says Mark. If you want to text 0467 922 702. He doesn't know what day of the week it is. Doesn't know his own phone number. It's going very well. If you want to call us, 1300 222 702. Now, were you badly parented? Maybe you grew up with family violence or the neglect of parents who just weren't that into the job of parenting you. Maybe you grew up in a family where the parents argued about parenting, one overly strict, the other lax, and them fighting about it in front of you. That's hardly ideal either. When you became a parent yourself, given that background, how easy was it to reset to find your own model of parenting. Did you try to find good parents you could copy, not having had that example yourself to follow? Or did your parents actually give you an instant model? I'll just do everything, the opposite of what they did. That's the sort of parent I'm going to be. And sometimes even with the best of intentions, did you find yourself occasionally reverting to those bad models of your own childhood? Almost like the hand of your father or your mother had reached out from your childhood and grabbed you and kind of got you doing what they used to do. Being a good parent when your own parents weren't so great. That's our topic for Midweek Conference. And I hope you can share your own experiences of the childhood you had and then how you tried to transform it into a better childhood for your own children. 1300 222 702. If you've got a story to tell and some wisdom to impart, I'd love you to call us 1300 222 702. Anne Hollands is Australia's National Children's Commissioner, and she joins us here on Drive. And good afternoon.
Hello, Richard.
Now, in healthy families, I guess you learn to parent through the parenting you were given. You just copy it. But not everyone's that lucky, are they?
No, indeed. And, well, I guess every family is sort of, what was the saying, imperfect in a different way, you know. So there's a lot of variability, of course, and it does sort of run across the generations because, you know, the thing is that what we experience as children is really powerful, and it's powerful in influencing our later lives, including how we are as parents, whether we like it or not. And it's really understandable that we would reach for what seems familiar when we become parents, especially when we're under pressure. And let's face it, we know there's a lot of pressure moments when you're dealing with kids, right? So, but it is also possible to change, to adapt what we saw our parents doing, but and what feels sort of familiar somehow to us, if we want to. If we don't think it's fit for purpose now, or with our own children, if we really want to do it a different way, it's just quite hard because it's habitual behaviour that we've had sort of wired. We've grown up with that wired into us, and we have to kind of step aside and deliberately change.
That's right. That's why I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, because on one hand I can see that it would be easy to follow the patterns of the past, even if intellectually you feel they're terrible patterns. But on the other hand, I can imagine some people being really inspired by the bad parenting they got to say, I'm not going to be that sort. I'm not, whatever the qualities of it were, either violence or neglect or emotional distance or whatever it was that they felt was not ideal about their own parenting. I can imagine that being inspiring. I'm not going to do that with my own children.
Yeah, and I think it can inspire us to go looking for other role models, as you said in your intro, or to indeed get educated about, well, what is good parenting? And if there is a lot more science now to back us in on that, by the way, whereas it used to be seen as sort of something that you intuitively knew how to do it. Now we know that there are better ways and less good ways, you know, given that no one's perfect every day, of course, but if you do some things most of the time, then we know that you know things are going to work out a lot better.
Anne Hollands is with us, Australia's National Children's Commission. Did you just follow the parenting that you got? If you didn't like it at the time, do you try to do the opposite? How does this go? How difficult is it to change the patterns you grew up with? With the best intentions, do you sometimes find yourself slipping back into those habitual patterns because they're so familiar, even though you wanted to resist them? 1300 222 702 is the number. Eileen is here. Good afternoon.
Hello, how are you? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get you off speakerphone.
Back onto the... Yeah, that's better. So tell us your story, Eileen.
So my story is I grew up in a council house in Coventry, two wonderful parents, but they had very little. So I was always saying, could I have that doll? Could I have this? And it was always no. And I was always upset and sad. So I moved to Australia, become quite successful and have two children of my own and decide I will never, ever say no and spoiled them beyond spoiling. But now my son has a daughter and he's very strict on her, and he will not spoil her, and he will not give her things. So it's actually gone backwards, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Each generation does the opposite of the previous generation.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a good story because I mean it's about the freedom from poverty, though, isn't it? It's very understandable if you grew up with that, you sort of you want to break free of it, don't you?
You absolutely do, and if you can afford to buy that doll or that bicycle, then you'll buy it for them.
But not your son, of course.
No, not just that. And, I very rarely said no, which I don't think was a good thing, but I think they appreciate it, but I think they also realise that they were never told no.
Okay, so back to the sort of values of the grandparents in a way.
Yeah, so my little granddaughter is often saying, Daddy, can I have? And he says, no, you can't, because you can't have everything.
You can't have everything. And what does the grandmother do, though? You keep spoiling them, do you?
I'm spoiling her, absolutely. I'm spoiling her. It's in my nature now.
You go for it. Hey, that's our right, isn't it, as grandparents? Hey, Eileen, thanks so much. 1300 222 702. How do you do things when the parenting that you got, you want to change it in some ways? How difficult is that to achieve? Were you determined not to be the parents that you had yourself, to change things? 1300 222 702. On the text 0467 922 702. And I love that story about coming from poverty, going to spoiling, then back to being cautious about it.
Well, yes, and both Eileen and her son, who is now a parent, have shown that you can do it differently, that you can make deliberate decisions. And yes, I mean, circumstances like poverty obviously can kind of get in the way of us perhaps always being able to sort of make the best decisions, if you like. I mean, Eileen can see now that she perhaps should have said no sometimes, right? But that's been picked up by her son. So, it's a nice sort of journey in that family to see how the parenting styles have changed.
Yeah, and of course her parents, they might not have wanted to say no. They just didn't have any ability to say yes because they had no money.
No, that's right. And sometimes, of course, things like giving kids stuff can become associated with showing love. And so I think, as a parent, if you're thinking through some of these things about what kind of parent do I want to be, do I want to be different to what I had, then perhaps it's important to also have some time reflecting on your own self, how that style had affected you, and maybe what some of your triggers might be before you sort of launch into, changing everything, if you like. I mean, it's about a bit of self-awareness can help.
Anne Hollins is with us. Our topic, being a good parent when your own parents weren't so great. That's what we want to talk about, how you try to change those parenting styles that you grew up with. Maybe you grew up with family violence, determined not to do it. How difficult was it to black out those patterns, or did you find they kind of reached out and grabbed you even with the best intentions? Maybe you grew up with distance. That was, I think, a very common thing about parents who either weren't that into parenting or maybe even found it difficult to show love and affection. Have you been determined to do the opposite of that? How's that gone for you? Has it been easy because you had such a negative example to just do the opposite of? You can tell us 1300 222 702. On the text, this is from Michael in Hazelbrook. Michael, thank you so much. My father was brought up from the old school and never showed any love or tenderness, he says. When I became a father, I decided that I would show my children how much I love them, and very often I love kissing and cuddling my kids and telling them all the time how much I love them. When they get sick, it's so lovely to do. And now I can't understand how my father remains so cold and distant all those years. That's from Michael in Hazelbrook. And something similar from another. I tell my kids every day that I love them because my parents have never said it to me, and those words matter. In a way, what Michael says and brings up another part of this, which is sometimes when you become a parent, you become aware and even a little bit upset about the poor parenting you received. I mean, you might be more upset now than you were at the time because you realise how rich this relationship can be.
Yes, it can be quite confusing, as Michael says in his text, like how come his father didn't do that when it's such a precious relationship, and, it almost can't make sense of it now. But again, we're hearing in these texts some generational change, of course, and, you know, what's acceptable and not acceptable in one generation compared to another. And even that thing of saying, I love you every day to your child, I mean, well, I don't know about you, Richard, but that didn't happen to me. So, you know, I think that that was kind of not the done thing across many families.
Well,
if
you said that you love them all the time, they might get too big for their boots, Anne.
Get tickets on themselves.
They might get tickets on themselves, or too big for their boots, or well, there were a variety of expressions, weren't there?
That's exactly right. And so we have very much done a 180-degree shift on that, where we really do want our kids to know, generally these days, you know, without any shadow of a doubt, how much we care about them. But you know, that's often a cultural thing to do with different generations.
You see, I think this is one of the most inspiring things in life. If you can give your children better parenting than you received. And it's, you know, I think it can be quite difficult because of the things we've talked about the modelling that the good modelling you can't draw on. But if you can do it, I think it's the most beautiful thing, you know, to take darkness and then turn it into light is one of the great ambitions for life, really. I remember, I write about this in Flesh Wounds, but the best speech I've ever seen in my life, you know, forget Barack Obama and Winston Churchill or anything like that. The best speech was at a 70th birthday party of a family friend of ours. And he had a really rough childhood. I think by the sound of things, he probably had pretty violent parents and all of that stuff. And he's got 4 daughters and a son. And one of the daughters made the best speech I've ever heard. And it was also the shortest speech I've ever heard. Because she said, you know, they're all gathered round at the 70th birthday party. And she said, if you knew what my dad had been through and yet what he gave us. And then she burst into tears and was sobbing so much she couldn't continue. And that was the speach.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, well, absolutely.
And you know, I thought at that point, this guy, Noel, had come from a very dark place and somehow found light and turned darkness into light. And what an ambition for anyone's life there on his 70th birthday party to have a daughter who said that.
Well, absolutely. And what a creative achievement, as you said, to be able to fashion a different sort of relationship with your own children than what you had. And of course, the opposite of that is, and I know people even within my own family who chose not to have children because of their negative experiences, because they believed they couldn't be good parents. Right?
Yeah.
So you know, like, how sad and tragic is that? So to have that sort of that optimism and that resilience and that hope that you can do it differently and follow through on it is very inspiring. I agree.
And one of the things I'm hoping to get out of today is to say to people who have got that thought in their heads, absolutely, you can be a great parent, having not had good parents. I mean, I feel this really deeply in my heart that it's absolutely possible. And I hate it when people think, oh, it's going to be impossible because I never had a good model. I just don't think that's true, because I think, you know, I think you can just use it as a negative model. You know, you can just say, I'm going to be different. And that can be a really powerful thing.
It can. And hearing about others who've done that can really help get the confidence to try, okay? But not everyone naturally has that self-confidence, of course. The good thing these days is that there is a lot more help available than there used to be. You know, even the Raising Children's Network website, you know, like, we have stuff online that we can easily access, as well as counselling and other parenting education programs and so on. None of that was really around back in the day. So now we can actually go looking for, well, what are some better ways that will suit me, that will fit with who I am, and how can I better understand how my experiences have affected me and rise above those.
Anne Hollands is here, Australia's National Children's Commissioner. If you want to join the discussion, 1300 222 702. On the text 0467 922 702. Our topic, being a good parent when your own parents weren't so great. Does that chime with you? If you've got a story to tell us, 1300 222 702. On the text, when I was little, I hated and was distressed by my parents shouting at each other, says our texter. I swore that if I ever married, I would never let my children see me arguing with their mother. I never have. When we had our moments, it was behind closed doors. So absolutely using that example and saying, I'm going to do the opposite. Vlasta says, I grew up with a violent parent and abuse. Domestic violence was a daily thing. My parents stayed together. I escaped to the other side of the planet from Europe to here. When I first became a mum, I was determined to do the exact opposite to what I've been through. It was so difficult at first, as I kept feeling sad and traumatised, remembering my childhood and being so distraught about my father being so violent towards us as kids. I feel I need to surround my kids with love because that's what they deserve. My brother chose to never have kids as he was scared to repeat the abuse. That's from Vlasta. So exactly the story you're saying, Anne, of someone denying themselves parenthood because of that fear. And yet Vlasta's example really of being able to find the love and give her children something very different.
Yes, although she said it was hard at first. So, recognising that breaking free of whatever those sort of chains that have sort of you were kind of constrained by because of your own experiences, they do affect us. They're incredibly powerful. So not to pretend otherwise, but to kind of take them on, front on, full frontal, absolutely go, yes, I had a really terrible childhood. That, these things happened to me, but I can do it differently and I'm going to get help to achieve that.
Brendan is here. Hi, Brendan.
Oh, hey, Richard.
Yeah,
Look,
your experience. Yeah,
I just wanted to add a little bit to what you were saying there. I mean, on one hand, you guys are talking about just being a better parent than your parents were, which I think is absolutely what we should all be aiming to do. I think there's two things there. One is don't set the bar too high. Keep the good stuff that your parents did, because every parent does lots of good stuff, even the ones who do bad stuff, and then minimise the bad stuff. And then the extra layer is to then pass on to your children that their job in their families is to do better than you've done.
Yeah. So each generation does a little better, and
Correct.
That's right. Yeah. Well, our kids are doing better than we did, aren't they, Anne, with raising the next generation?
100%, Richard, 100%. And Brendan's really right. I mean, there is no such thing as the perfect parent, by the way. We're all a sort of a work in progress. And I've got my list here. Can I go through some of the things that I reckon if we do these things most of the time, then we'll be all right. I think we need to try to be predictable with our kids, like not hit them for what they did, one day and then smile the next day, or, actually prefer not to hit them at all. But, be predictable, but be kind. Be attuned to the needs of the child. So kind of put your own needs aside to try to sort of stand in their shoes and see the world through their eyes a little bit. Try to relax and have some fun with the kids, and recognise that we need to change our style as the child grows and develops. So it requires a lot of flexibility. I reckon if you do those things most of the time, you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, Anne Hollins, thank you. Brendan, thank you very much. Just on the text, when I was little, my siblings and I are very proud that we did not continue the physical abuse that we were subjected to, says our texter Lee, into our own families. All of us have seen that capacity in ourselves due to mental load, frustration, but we've been able to recognise it and pull back before the evil overcomes. That's from Lee, and that's such an interesting text, isn't it? Just in a few lines, capturing that sense that you're determined intellectually not to repeat the things you were subjected to, but how the past has this sort of ability to sort of reach out like a hand from the grave and pull you back into those patterns.
Well, it's kind of wired into us. That's the thing. Those early years when our brain is developing very fast, our experiences are lifelong, and they can be really positive experiences that set us up very well, but sometimes, sadly, they can be negative ones that we spend really our whole lives trying to overcome. But there are fantastic stories of people who do exactly that, given the right circumstances and the support around them.
Yeah, Lee says it's difficult, but managed it. From Eric, my brother and I didn't have children. Our father belted mum and me. We could not bring kids into the world with this background. That's from Eric. So it is quite common, as you're saying, Anne, for people just to say, I can't risk it. Richard is here on the line. Hi, Richard.
Hey, how you doing? I'm loving this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Add to it.
I'm a parent of 3 children and recently become a grandparent. And just experiencing from myself, I've had to almost implement 3 different parenting styles as my children were growing up according to their personalities. I'm an immigrant, and I often feel that because there are so many immigrant experiences in Australia, you bring a lot of negative or positive traumas in your DNA, and kids don't have that same experience as you may be experienced in another country or the stories or circumstances you grew up in. So I think it's a lot of personal growth to kind of get it right.
Yes, in other words, acknowledge this is not to justify violence or anything like that to children, but do understand that you and this is a journey for all of us, that the strange ways in which your parents treated you often had their own causes.
Absolutely. And I often told my kids when I got it wrong, parenting them, like, this is the first time I've got a 12-year-old or a 15-year-old. I'm learning as well as you're growing. The main point I want to make, I think the healthiest environment is to have lots of extended family and lots of parenting role models around parents that kids can draw on, because we so often get it wrong.
Yeah, the emergency mum and the emergency dad, and make sure you get a groovy aunt. They're they're always very useful. 2 minutes to 6. Australia's National Children's Commissioner Anne Hollands is here, but we appreciate so much your stories and the honesty of them. Elle says, my husband's father beat him for every small infraction. We decided we would not hit our kids and find other ways to guide or discipline. That decision meant it was never a struggle or a temptation to avoid hitting them, and they've turned out okay too. That's from Elle on the text. This is about the decision not to have children because you've had a bad childhood. Is there any greater proof that you're a caring parent than deciding not to have children because you are concerned for the possibility of their welfare? And I take that point too, although I do insist from the depth of my heart that it is possible to have a rotten childhood and still be a great parent. And I think Anne agrees with that.
Yes, and just a few of the things the callers and texters have said. I think sharing the load is a really important thing. So if you can get people around you, even if they are a proxy family but not your real family, then I think that really helps. But just one final thought.
Really quickly, yeah.
Yeah. This is a relationship. You're not doing stuff to the child. You're in a relationship with the child. Try and enjoy that and develop that as a really rich relationship.
The greatest fun you can have. Hey, Anne, thank you so much.
Thanks, Richard.
Anne Hollands, Australia's National Children's Commissioner, and to everyone who rang in and wrote with their stories, we're very grateful. It's 6 o'clock.
Good evening, Adam Story with ABC News. Heavy rain continues to hit parts of the state following severe thunderstorms across Sydney overnight. Danuta Gazaki reports.
The New South Wales State Emergency Service says Maitland in the Hunter region is the latest area to be hit with heavy rain, with a childcare centre and some local shops sandbagged due to the large amount of water. SES spokesperson Alicia Dooley says there's been over 800 calls for help statewide yesterday and today. She says there's been more than a dozen flood rescues, especially in Sydney's north, Orange in the central west and the Hunter region.
Overall, we got 14 flood rescues, where 10 of those were involving cars.
As the clean-up continues, some households remain without power in Sydney's north, south-east and inner city.
There's heavy traffic in the Blue Mountains tonight, with all westbound lanes of the Great Western Highway still closed following a multi-car crash. It follows the accident involving a truck and 5 cars between Leura and Wentworth Falls earlier today. 7 people were taken to hospital, including a child. One man is in a serious but stable condition with suspected hip and rib injuries. Traffic authorities say only one eastbound lane of the highway has been reopened. Emergency services in New Zealand say they're ready to respond if the weather situation escalates as recovery efforts continue from ex-tropical cyclone Gabrielle. Chelsea Hetherington reports.
More than a week since Cyclone Gabrielle tore through the North Island, another period of heavy rain is expected. Hawke's Bay is in for 48 hours of wet weather from tomorrow, with heavy falls also possible around hard-hit Gisborne. Auckland Emergency Management Controller Rachel Kelleher says more rain is also on the way there too, and the focus remains on supporting recovery efforts.
There's still a lot of work to do, and we're grateful for the patience and resilience being shown by those in the community.
Power is yet to be restored to thousands of homes, and hundreds of kilometres of roads still have to be repaired.
The Prime Minister says confirmation that wages are growing at an annual pace of 3.3% is encouraging. Newly released data from the Bureau of Statistics shows wages rose by 0.8% in December. They grew 0.1% in the last quarter. Real wages continue to fall, though, with inflation outrunning wage growth at 7.8%. But Anthony Albanese says it's a sign wages are beginning to move again.
The fastest rate of wages growth in a decade, confirmed today. Good jobs and fair wages are fundamental to an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
The Robodebt Royal Commission has heard the department responsible for managing the illegal debt collection scheme had a culture that stopped people asking questions about the legality of the program. More from Alexandria Oetting.
Former Chief Counsel at the Department of Human Services, Tim French, has today fronted the inquiry into the illegal automated debt scheme. He worked in a role at DHS between 2019 and 2020. Mr French was asked why he thought lawyers in the department didn't seek legal advice about robo-debt after a top silk gave a presentation at a conference that put the legality of the scheme into question. He said he thought DHS senior executives had a control and command management style, which stopped employees asking questions about the program. He said he would have recommended DHS seek advice about robo-debt had he been in the role in 2017.
China's top diplomat, Wang Yi, is holding another meeting in Moscow, this time with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, amid concerns that Beijing may be ready to provide military support for the war in Ukraine. The BBC's Nicholas Rocher reports.
From the start of Russia's so-called special military operation 1 year ago, China has refused to condemn Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, although it has claimed it is impartial in the conflict. This week, Wang Yi said China supported peace and negotiations and would put forward its own position on a political settlement of the crisis. It's not clear what Mr. Wang will say in Moscow, but the EU and Washington have warned Beijing against providing military assistance to Russia's war effort in Ukraine.
Award-winning musician Sampa the Great has pulled out of the Byron Bay Blues Fest. In a statement, her representative says the Zambian artist has been advocating to be removed from the festival for a week after seeing the lineup. It comes after King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard cancelled their performance following criticism of the inclusion of the band Sticky Fingers. That band's lead singer, Dylan Frost, was previously involved in an offstage incident with another Australian artist. To the weather for tomorrow, a few showers and the chance of a thunderstorm in the northeast, the chance of a shower elsewhere in the east, early fog patches in the southeast. It'll be dry and mostly sunny in the west. For Sydney, an overnight low of 19, followed by a partly cloudy day with the slight chance of a shower and a top of 25. It'll be partly cloudy with the slight chance of a shower on Thursday and 26. That's ABC News at 6:05.
You're listening to Drive with Richard Glover on ABC Radio Sydney.
G'day, Richard Glover with you on ABC Radio Sydney. Coming up, an expert report tendered to the inquiry into the convictions of Kathleen Folbig for killing her 4 children claims the diary entries that were used to convict her are not admissions of guilt. We'll talk to our court reporter, Jamelle Wells, first up in this half hour. Also to with the same pay as for 5 days, gains a big leg up in the UK, tested by over 60 firms with surprising results. You'll hear from the New Zealand business leader who kicked it all off, and Indira Naidu with the evening show. It's all ahead here on ABC Radio Sydney, on radio at 7:02 a.m, on the ABC Listen app, on digital radio, on TV's Channel 25, and of course online everywhere. Yeah, just a final note in that conversation with Anne about parenting and what happens when you've had bad parenting yourself and what that means for your life and your own parenting. This is very interesting, I think. The first from one of our texters, doesn't give a name, but the first thing I had to do to recover from some fairly dysfunctional parenting from my father was to realise he was human and facing his own demons. Forgiving him helped me separate who I am from his behaviour towards me and do things differently with my own kids. My siblings were more focused on how they'd been victimised by him, and I think they've not been able to move on in the same way. So, yeah, we were talking about that right at the end. We were talking about the seeing the damage, the damaged parents, and realising that there was probably a reason for their damage, and that's a kind of important moment in your own growth. Emma in Randwick says, I had a dreadful mother who has narcissistic personality disorder, practiced awful passive-aggressive behaviour, signalled me out as the only other female in the family. I spent thousands of dollars and time unpacking the damage she created. My body was so tight, which affected my ability to get pregnant. Once I understood who she was, I no longer let her affect me. I took back control mentally, and my body loosened. I became pregnant with my son in absolutely no time, and I vowed never to act that way to my own son. And to this day, I haven't. That's from Emma. Jamelle Wells, our ABC senior court reporter, is with us again as the Kathleen Folbig inquiry continues. This woman, as you know, has already served about 20 years in prison for killing her 4 children. But now there's lots of evidence in various ways, scientific evidence, about the fact that at least 2 or 3 of them had, the 2 girls had a genetic disease which may have caused their death. The son had epilepsy in a way that Monique Ryan, a paediatrician before she became a politician, says may have been the cause of his death. And then a lot of focus today on the diary entries, which were a big part of what convicted her in the first place. I think these diary entries which seem to be confessions of guilt, but maybe not, according to an expert witness today. Jamelle Wells is with us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard.
Yeah, the diary was the focus today, wasn't it?
Well, this was a written submission to the inquiry from a witness who is actually going to be called up on Friday. So it was tabled as part of the inquiry and released, so we were able to get a hold of it and report on it for you. But there is a series of psychologists and psychiatrists that are going to start giving evidence in person from tomorrow about Kathleen Folbig's diary entries. And this written submission, Richard, was from Dr. Joanna Garstang. She's an expert in the UK in sudden unexplained infant death, and she has looked through the diaries and she's analysed particular lines in them that seem quite damning and that were used against Kathleen Folbig at her trial. And Dr. Garstang has said that they are expressions of self-blame and guilt, and she says that they are things that she's witnessed in her clinical and research practice, and she does not consider them to be true confessions of guilt.
In other words, a mum having lost her children might be just feeling terrible about herself and the world and how did I let this happen kind of thing.
That's right. And what we heard in the very openings of this inquiry is that a range of experts who've analysed the diaries will give evidence over the next couple of days about how they think Kathleen Folbig has some very serious grief disorder from having experienced a lot of trauma through the deaths of her children. And she's someone who wrote these diary entries when she was having relationship problems and didn't have a lot of social support, and that they were a coping mechanism. And she herself, remember we talked a couple of days ago about letters she wrote from jail referring to her diary entries as sounding atrocious, but saying, I wrote them when I was not in a positive frame of mind. I referred to black moods, which were my depressive state, nothing nasty or murderous or evil. But some of the diary entries are very damning, and the case against her at trial in 2003, the Crown case was that the diary entries were an admission of guilt, and they listed a whole string of them. And the entries included things like she had mixed feelings about her children, how she was feeling very depressed and angry, and how one of her children wouldn't be quiet. And one of the lines she used was about her daughter Sarah, and her daughter Laura, I should say, and she said she was angry and depressed and upset after she, and I quote, lost it with Laura. And she said, I'm scared that she'll leave me now just like Sarah did, and I knew I was short-tempered and cruel sometimes to her, and she left with a bit of help. That was a diary entry in January 1998. And another entry written sometime later was, I often regret Caleb and Patrick only because because your life changes so much, and maybe I'm not a person who likes change. So they were the sorts of diary entries that were used to convict her.
It is interesting, though, that those are sort of thoughts that would have, parenting is hard. You can imagine many parents having moments. They might not confide them to a diary, but they might confide them in their own black moods to, am I up to this? Can I cope with all the requirements of parenting? Because some of the diary entries, that's kind of all they're saying, really.
Yes, and that's exactly what the counsel assisting said. She said they were expert witnesses who've analysed them since 2003 will argue that they were a coping mechanism and a way for her to pour her heart out and try to make sense of what happened. And remember, at this inquiry, we've heard some witnesses argue that all the children possibly died from some sort of natural cause. And one witness very early on in the piece said that he thought it was very tragic, that the story of the Folbig children and family was very tragic and very sad. And remember too, there's been reference also to Kathleen Folbig's own background. Remember that when she was very young, only a young child, her father murdered her own mother, and she was actually placed into foster care from a very young age. So it's not as if she's had an easy childhood, and these expert witnesses are expected to include that in some of the evidence that they give.
Yeah, I mean, what a life to have that happen. And then, I mean, let's assume just for a second that she is innocent, to be in prison for over 20 years. To lose your 4 children, then to be in prison for over 20 years.
You just can't imagine it, can you? And of course, the point of this inquiry, even though she was convicted and given that long jail sentence, is questioning those convictions. And this particular inquiry came about because new scientific evidence was discovered that suggested her daughters have some sort of gene mutation that could have caused their deaths. And we've heard over the last couple of days that her 2 sons had medical issues as well. So she has maintained all along she's innocent, and she's never given up, nor have a large group of her supporters who include very senior members and well-respected people in the scientific community. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of this inquiry.
Yeah, what the inquiry concludes in the end after hearing all this evidence. Jamelle, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Richard.
Jamelle Wells, our ABC senior court reporter. It is currently 14 minutes past 6 here on ABC Radio.
ABC Radio Sydney traffic.
At Mount Tomah, Bells Line of Road near Skyline Road, 2 trucks and a car have had an accident there. There are people trapped, I'm afraid. Heavy traffic conditions, and the road is closed in both directions. So the Bells Line of Road near Skyline Road at Mount Tomah closed in both directions. It's been a bad day for the mountains. The other big problem has been Wentworth Falls, the Great Western Highway between Lura Mall and Scott Avenue. Multiple vehicles involved in an accident there. And the highway is still closed westbound. One eastbound lane they've managed to get reopened, but still a big problem at Wentworth Falls. If you're in Woolloomooloo, the Eastern Distributor off-ramp to Cathedral Street, a truck breakdown there with one of 2 southbound lanes affected. And at Paddington, Oxford Street, just past Young Street, a car breakdown with one eastbound lane gone. That's the latest. Well, across Britain, 61 companies and organisations moved their staff into a 4-day week pattern with no drop in salary. It was a test, a 6-month period starting in June last year. And the results have now been published. And they show that 56 of the 61 companies, so the vast majority, have decided to stick with the 4-day week arrangement after the end of the trial due to the benefits they saw. In fact, 18 firms already have declared the move permanent. Employees in the trial reported lower levels of stress and burnout, took fewer sick days, while employers saw improvements in both revenue and staff retention with no loss of productivity. This according to the largest ever trial examining the effects of moving to a 4-day working week. So could it be that most elusive of things? An idea which is good for profits and for employees, which makes the boss happy, but also the worker happy. Andrew Barnes is the co-founder of the 4-Day Week Global and director of Perpetual Guardian in New Zealand. We talked to him on Drive before about how he came up with this idea and worked it with his own company in New Zealand. But now it's really getting to be a big worldwide movement. And he joins us again on Drive. Andrew, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard.
Now, you're over in the UK where this has been big news today. Can you tell us about the study or at least the test period, how it came about and the results that are now in?
Yeah, well, this is one of the second of our large trials. We did US, Canada and Ireland, which reported just before Christmas. The UK is reporting now. And then in a couple of months, we will have the results from our Australia and New Zealand trials. And what we do is we get a whole pile of companies together. We give them some support and mentoring, access to people who've done it before. And then they run the program, the pilot program, in their own organizations for 6 months. And then we run research alongside, which is coordinated in this case by Boston College and Cambridge University.
Just the simplest question, how can productivity not be affected when people are working fewer hours?
Well, I think the start point, Richard, is that actually we're not actually productive the whole time we're at work. And so what this is doing is saying, how do you change the behaviors, the processes, the attitudes often of people at work so that you eliminate all that unproductive time? How many of us have spent far too long, for example, in meaningless meetings?
So if you're working 4 days a week, it focuses the mind, basically, of everybody.
That's exactly right. The early studies that made me go down this path indicated that people were only productive for 2.5 to 3 hours a day. And so all you actually have to do if you drop a day is find 45 minutes of additional productivity. What, of course, happens is people, when given the opportunity to work smarter, and they get the benefit in the time off that's important to them, what actually happens is productivity goes up. One of the results from the trial was that revenues of participating companies in the trial were 35% higher than the comparable period the year before.
Wow, that's a
even
big
allowing for COVID.
Yeah,
that is an incredible statistic.
Wow, up by a third. Some of the figures: a 65% reduction in sick days, a 57% drop in the number of staff leaving compared with the same 6-month period in the previous year. And this all goes to the fact that so many companies are then putting up their hands to stick with it. I wonder though whether some of this impact is short-term, whether people are so grateful for this new program that they work their socks off for 6 months, but then if it was absolutely standardised over the whole economy and this wasn't some special treat provided by this one company for a short period, I wonder if it would run out of steam.
There is a risk of that. Obviously, we've been doing it in Perpetual Guardian now for 4 years. We haven't seen that. You've got companies like Volkswagen that manufacture cars on a 4-day week. They're not seeing it. And countries like Holland, which have a average working week, and I think at about 28 hours, they are high productive countries. So what I think we will need to do now is continue to report on these companies as they continue their journey and see if, in fact, productivity, does drop. But we don't think it will, having seen the evidence from those organisations like ourselves that have been doing it for years.
Andrew Barnes is with us. The other thing which is so fascinating, maybe this is the most important thing of all, actually, we've been talking about profits and sick days and all of that. People are spending more time with their kids.
They are. And interestingly, one of the statistics that really jumped out of this report was that in the trial, the amount of time men spent looking after their children went up 27%. Now, that's got real implications when we talk about gender equality. Not only does the 4-day week assist in getting rid of those 4 days 80% pay contracts that a lot of returning mothers do. But when we allow our men to get out of the organisation where the badge of honour isn't about working long hours, you start to see this cascade in terms of better outcomes at home, better outcomes for our kids. And I think that's one of the most interesting statistics in the report.
Well, and also you make a better employee, don't you? I always think if you're, I don't know what you're running, if you're running an advertising agency or a supermarket, or you want actually a worker who spends some time at the soccer coaching. You want them talking to parents about their experience in the supermarket or whatever business you're in. That makes a person who understands their society better.
You want people to be the best they can be at work and the best they can be at home. That's absolutely a mantra. And so you're right. I think this gives you much better connection. We were talking to one of the participants, Atom Bank here, and what they said is that when they announced it, the volume of people who came and joined their organization, in terms of as clients, they were absolutely overwhelmed. And the reasoning being is I think it also makes the organization more human, and people relate to organizations that are more human and that are seen to be progressive and treat their employees well.
Andrew Barnes is with us, co-founder of 4 Day Week Global and director at Perpetual Guardian in New Zealand. He's a business leader himself, brought this into his own company and now is watching this worldwide research. As you heard, Canada and US reporting before Christmas. Now the big report from the UK with a report of the participating Australian and New Zealand firms to come. Just a question without notice on the text line. Can you ask Andrew whether it matters what day of the week they have off? Do they all have to have the same day off?
No, look, we are an organisation, for example, that needs to have retail branches open all the time. So we have some people who take a Monday, some a Tuesday. We have people who take a couple of afternoons. And we have working parents who often work 5 days but compressed hours. So when we say 4 day week, what we're talking about is what we call the 100-80-100 principle. 100% pay, 80% of time, but provided we get 100% productivity. And so what happens is different companies decide how they're going to deal with that. Some do close for a day. We're one of the ones that don't. And if you look at an organization like Volkswagen, they manufacture cars 24/7, but yet their employees are working 32 hours.
Okay, so that's interesting, something like a factory. I can understand why knowledge workers in an office might be able to just lift their productivity in the way that you suggest. With something like a factory model, isn't everyone almost forced to get to the rhythm of the machine anyway?
Yeah, but they don't have to work 9 to 5 to get to the rhythm of the machine. They can actually work different shift patterns, and that's what Volkswagen proves. Actually also equally applies in medical facilities. So, for example, Stanford Medical School has gone on to a 4 day week, and now we've got some of the health trusts in the UK starting to talk about maybe shifting to a 4 day week. And that means, of course, you have less burnout in your nurses and your doctors. That then in turn leads to better health outcomes because you're not making those mistakes when you're stressed. And that in turn probably means that you don't keep losing people to the industry. So we believe it is applicable whether you're in manufacturing, retailing, logistics, health, or conventional knowledge-based businesses.
It's such an interesting study, and the results are so startling in terms of profitability and employee engagement from the UK study. Just tell me quickly, Andrew, the Australian study. How many companies have you got involved here in New Zealand in the test study, and are you getting any signs that they're going to get as good results as this?
We haven't yet got the data out. It's coming out in a couple of months. We've got about 33 companies, of which the vast majority are Australian, are participating in that pilot. It's going to be interesting because that's the one we'll say, well, then it's about the 5th and 6th countries that we've run these trials. The outcomes are consistent. And then the one after that is South Africa, which is going to be very interesting because obviously that is a different culture. And it will be interesting to see whether the African results follow the pattern that healthier, happier, more rested, more engaged staff are more productive.
Well, someone says on the text, this guy is a hero, and I think you're certainly involved in something so interesting. And if these results continue to come through, it might bring an awful lot of happiness to an awful lot of people. Andrew Barnes, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thanks, Richard.
There's Andrew Barnes, Director at Perpetual Guardian in New Zealand and co-founder of the 4-Day Week.
ABC Radio Sydney Traffic.
Jeff Wallace is here from the Australian Traffic Network. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Richard. Just picking up on camera here at the TMC. A broken down car. It's on the freeway North Sydney, middle section, northbound, just past the Mount Street overpass. The tow truck is with it. Mount Tomah coming through a crash, and that's blocking both ways for the Belzina Road. We had this earlier crash in the mountains. Still blocking westbound for the Great Western Highway near Lura Mall at Wentworth Falls. Also, Epping Road, very slow for that run westbound Marsfield via Mirror Road up towards Beecroft Road. I'm Jeff Wallace, Australian Traffic Network.
Jeff, thank you very much. And Indira Naidu on the evening show. How would you like a 4-day? We already have a 4-day week.
Well, I do, but I also work Friday.
You got the
another
TV
show.
You got the TV show too now.
I do, but I think it's a great idea. It makes sense.
I just like somebody testing it out in their own company in New Zealand. Quite a few years ago now, finding it works, and then thinking, this is interesting. And then he's got a very scientific mind, as you heard. He wants it to be properly studied and properly researched to see if it works and see where it works and whether it works in construction and hospitality and in medical. I think it's fascinating.
It's the way to go.
So fascinating.
Our quiz question tonight, Richard, is what is your party trick? Mm-hmm. Do you have one?
Yep, I do.
Oh.
It depends on having friends who like champagne or sparkling wine.
Yeah.
And because I was a Hilton waiter when I was at university, I can open a bottle properly.
Oh.
Which is, you know how people do that noisy thing where they boom, and it hits the ceiling? That's not the rate. No,
it's not meant to make a noise, is it?
It's not meant to make. It's meant to, a princess. Imagine a princess, very beautiful princess. Imagine that princess let loose the most tiny and discreet of farts.
Right.
That's what it's meant to sound like.
A princess fart.
Very small. Very delicate. and you hold the cork hot, and then you twist the bottle, actually.
Yes, at the bottom.
It goes
And do you mesmerise all around you?
Oh, people
with your princess fart?
They're pretty impressed, yeah.
That's a good trick. I want to see you do that one.
Get me a bottle of champagne. That's the first step.
Oh, okay, that's an expensive
Doesn't
trick.
have to be French. It still works with the cheap stuff.
Well, my trick, it's very hard to translate on radio, but what I can do, which is really weird, is sort of move my head like this.
Oh, wow!
Isn't that weird?
Good.
I know.
That's good. We should get a double act.
Me and my weird
you
shaking
can do the
head.
head, I'll do the champagne, and then we'll serve the champers.
All the listeners are thinking, what is she doing to her head?
It's good.
Yeah.
You wait to see it.
So I want to...
all on the evening show with Indira Naidu. It's PM time. That's 6:30.